Perfect. Great. I'll make sure we get her back up. So you'll see underneath the screen. Just a moment. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
So when your device went to sleep, though,
No,
it's not showing live.
it's not showing live
It's
apparently.
showing. So
He's on the live stream now.
yeah. So she just hit go live, and there you are.
That's just,
But we lost when your device went to sleep. We lost your desktop. So can we go and activate that again in your Chrome browser?
Oh, that was the same problem yesterday.
All right.
Okay. So then, can you update the Telegram group with the Foresight pub link? That's the good link to use.
Huh? No, it works now.
Okay, it does.
So
yeah, there we go. And then hit
Jason
share.
is now seeing it.
Yep, that one. And share screen, the bottom option. There you go. Click that window. And then hit share. There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Where do I stand? Do I stand up here or do I stand back?
Wherever. You can sit in the front, sit up here. Okay.
Are you ready for the music to go down and you guys ready to start?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up so early. Who here is a bit jet lagged? We have a few. Okay, good. So I'm counting on your energy, guys, this morning to level us up. Thank you so much for joining so early. I think this is now I think it's the fifth session in the DeSci track. So we started off with on Monday with Shadi, who I think is not here yet, and Eugene over there, and then really had like a kind of a quick overview of all the DeSci sessions that we have going for you this week. Then yesterday we had a bit of a deep dive into the more long-term existential risk scenarios arising from decentralized technologies and how we can build decentralized solutions for them to avoid that we get centralized ones instead. And then today we had afterwards Eugene with a series of lightning talks. And today we're going to be discussing Foresight DAO and tech trees. And then afterwards Eugene also will be here. And I think he has food coming too. Is that correct? Yeah. Early lunch, guys. Yeah. Okay, great. All right. Well, so in a nutshell, basically, I want to give you a quick outline of today, and then I want to give you a quick outline of my talk, and then afterwards, I think we can do it in quite decentralized discussion style with maybe a panel. But I really want this to be as interactive as possible. So maybe just to get a feeling of the room of like why people are here, who is interested or who's in a DAO, who's actively participating in a DAO right now. Okay, cool. That's about 50%, maybe even over. Cool. Who here has heard of tech trees before? No concept. Okay, very nice. Well, then who here is investing or funding early stage deep tech science? Okay, a few of you. Great. Okay, so we have, and obviously a few of you may not have said so, which I totally understand as well. Yes. Okay, cool. Well, so we have, I think, a pretty good crowd for tackling these topics. Let's make this, as interactive as possible. You're all here because any one of you, frankly, could be on the speaking podium. So this is really as interactive as possible. We want your ideas. We want your advice. This is going to be very collaborative, or as much as we can make it so early in the morning. Okay, so I will say a few words about Foresight, about our programs, and about how I think a DAO could slot in to fund and really accelerate many of our early stage science and tech. Then Aaron over here will say a few words about Foresight's tech trees, which are I would say a maximally decentralized effort to fund and map a bunch of the technologies that our groups and our fellows are working on. And then Evan over there will be finishing up with saying a few words about Maps Map, which is a hackathon that we started to create a better tool for building tech trees, because frankly, the tools that we have are not very Web3 compatible at the moment, and we need better tooling as well. So there's like 3 different types of I guess bits and pieces, and then afterwards we would love to have just an open discussion. But I'll start off with just giving a super quick overview. I do want to say that you have these the QR code over there. You can the QR code opens up to a form, and on the form you can fill in whether you're interested in DAOs, tech trees, or whether you're interested in our technical groups and whatsoever. So if you want to get involved in including in our Discord, then you can go through this form. On the website we only have an application-based form to the Discord to keep it a little bit discussion quality high. And so if you're interested in joining, you can go through this form and you'll be redirected into our respective channels. Okay, very cool. So let me start you off with who here knows about Foresight already? Who here has read maybe Engines of Creation? Who has read Engines of Creation? Okay, good. Well, that's like so Foresight in a nutshell got started 35 years ago now. So the 30 plus is not even accurate anymore. It's really one of the OG like long-termist futurist organizations. And back in the days, I mean, we were already pretty, I think, fringe back then and still are. So in these 30 years, we have still managed to keep the edge, I think. I would say many of our members really are signed up to cryonics. That was like the first thing that drew me to Foresight. But many of our members have for 30 plus years now cared very, very deeply about molecular nanotechnology, about space exploration, space development, and about many of the technologies that are now gradually coming online. So I think there were like, whenever I go back into our archives and look at our member gatherings from 1999, where they had the first prediction markets, Robin Hanson did his first ideas future at our 1999 member gathering, and people literally voted by sending checks to our office. So it's been like a pretty interesting organization to join. I'm pretty new to the org. I joined 7 years ago now, and then have gradually worked my way up. I came ultimately with a strong interest in longevity, but we do a variety of technologies that are really, I think, quite amenable to much of like more fringe, early stage, exotic science and tech funding. Okay, so there are a few tracks that we support and focus on. We focus on molecular machines to better control matter. So that's atomically precise manufacturing. And so that's the original vision that Foresight was founded on. So really far out nanotechnology goals. And they were always a little bit out there, but now really, I think many of them are really coming online. You have a few fantastic projects doing really incredible stuff with DNA origami and so forth. You have biotech to reverse aging. So who is into longevity? Katja, I want your hand. Great. Okay, we have 2 hands over there. Great. This is always, I think, the one that I usually get most excitement from the more Web3 crypto scene, and it's one that we really deeply care about. We not only care about rejuvenation, but also everything from the more cryonic space, but also potentially a bionics angle. So we have the biotech angles like thoroughly in there. Computer science for secure human AI cooperation. So if you came to our session yesterday, who was at the book session yesterday? There we talked a lot about how can we create better structures in which humans and AIs can cooperate better in a decentralized way. So that's everything from federated learning, privacy preserving, machine learning, but also different ways in which crypto commerce can slot in there. Neurotech, who here cares about brain-computer interfaces? Okay, good. That's also usually a good show of hands from a more crypto-oriented crowd. And finally, space tech. So who here is really into space tech? That's anything from the more near-term stuff to asteroid mining to more Dyson sphere, Dyson swarm types of situations. And so obviously all of this stuff sounds pretty sci-fi, but there are lots of projects out there now that are doing really, really great work. All of this is too early stage and too niche for legacy investors to take on. Longevity is now getting there, and I'm really thrilled about it. But many of the other things I think are still a little bit too out there. So at Foresight, we do a few things to support these technologies. So we're really trying to do a little bit more of ecosystem building. So each of these technologies has individual tracks, and each of these tracks comes with a few different components. So we have seminars, and those are bi-weekly seminars. Each of these seminar groups consist about 150 to 200 people that are invited. And so they're mainly researchers in these areas, funders, institutional allies. We have a few folks from the FDA monitoring in the biotech one, for example. But those are pretty small groups that meet on a pretty regular basis to get a continuous deal flow of stuff that is still a bit too early for other organizations to start and to take it on. But for us, at least for having a seminar about it and just trying to see how we can potentially help this, either if it's via investing, via different types of donation support, or via just ecosystem building, mentorship, and so forth. So we have each of these seminars. If you're interested in learning about the work, they all come with slide presentations, with a video, and so forth. So we try to be quite open about how we share the knowledge, but the groups are themselves still quite close to allow good discussions in the Zoom chats. So these seminars exist for all of these. Yesterday I showed a few ones here. This one may be quite interesting to many of you guys here. That's much of the Web3 space, in which we discuss a lot about DAOs, in which we basically try to have a little bit of a deal flow of like very early stage Web3 projects, and so forth. And so if you're interested in our groups, then I really welcome you.
Sorry to interrupt, but the colors are inverted.
The colors are what?
The colors are inverted on the monitor here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll just do this.
But then the live stream is off again.
I'll check this stream. Did I?
Wow, I kind of want to see what the colors were like now. But you weren't quite sure whether we did it on purpose. Like, okay, that's a funky color combination, guys. Well, maybe it was on purpose. Okay, does the live stream still work? Or oh wow, okay, cool. Even with the slides show on the live stream. Okay, cool. Well, nice that didn't break. Okay, great. All right. So here again, we have our different programs. Oh, I guess you realized this when I showed the faces, and the faces all looked wrong. And before that, you were like, okay, this is a very exotic color combination. All right, well, here we go again. Well, I'm sure that we don't only have Martians as our panelists, I promise. They are real humans. So again, if you're interested, in our seminars, and if you want to get up to speed, I invite you to just check them out. You can also easily apply to join these groups. So we have an application form. We usually accept applications on a weekly basis, and so you can get onboarded to the groups in case you're working in them. But that's just one of the ways in which you do that. So that's our seminar groups, which are just like a continuous deal flow of new projects that are too early stage. So they usually run via nomination base. We also, in all of these areas, host workshops. And so we usually do in each of these tracks an annual workshop. The annual workshops are really out there to get, they're like a bit of, like, you can think of them as hackathons and as technical competitions. So in a nutshell, we usually have like project developments. So scientists come together for 2 days, they meet, and then they hack together a project that uses their individual best expertise to make progress on something that isn't really out there yet. And so those are all quite out there, the different projects. I welcome you to check them out. But these hackathons are usually, I think, quite fruitful. And so we have them in every one of these tracks. So if you're keen and eager to check them out, please feel free to do so. We're currently collaborating probably with Eugene on one that's cryptography focused later this year. Then we have one on biotech and biomarker standardization, very likely later this year. And then we have one on molecular machines, better modeling tools for designing molecular machines, coming up for those of you who are more into nanotechnology. And so those are our technical workshops. And then we have a bunch of prizes and fellowships and accelerators in how we support our work. And so if you're interested in checking out our accelerators, I invite you to do that too. Our fellowship started 5 years ago and kind of exploded in the sense that we used to take on under 10 fellows. This year we have over 40. And those fellows work in all of these areas. So basically, if you graduate from the seminars where we try to support you a little bit more, then you become a Foresight Fellow. And what it means to become a Foresight Fellow basically means that I'm running around like a headless chicken trying to matchmake you with our mentors and trying to matchmake you with a variety of funders that are in our ecosystem. So we have a really long list of mentors that are mixed between funders, that are mixed between domain experts, that are mixed between a variety of different institutional allies who can just tell our fellows a bit of the lay of the land of how to start better companies. So what we really try to do is pull these fellows out of academia. Some of them are already in startup land, not all of them are, and just make it easy for them to transition and have an easy opt-out process. Currently, 2/3 of our fellows for this year are actively trying to do this step and trying to raise money in these slots. We also have prizes in these areas. And so since 30 years now, we've been running the Feynman Prize. And so if you're interested in checking out our winners, you can do so here. But safe to say, I think we do good early bets. So Fraser Stoddart won our 2007 Feynman Prize, and he won the Nobel Prize in 2016 for his work. And so we really do take, I think, quite early stage bets, and we are really fortunate. We have for 30 plus years have had a pretty flourishing community in which we now all just continue to onboard new blood that just is really good at evaluating projects, and I'm always have massive imposter syndrome every day for being in the same room with everyone, because people are really quite smart. So why am I telling you all of this? I'm telling you all of this because, as I said, my main job is about trying to matchmake people like that want to get out of academia, that have really, really early stage, that have a project that is too crazy for anyone else to support, with funders or with mentors that are trying to support these fellows. And so that's been going relatively well. But I think one really good way on how to streamline this entire process is by creating a DAO. And for that, I mean that many of our funders, many of our donors even, I think, would be really eager to fund much more if only they had a really good community to do this with. On the other hand, many of our fellows, rather than me matchmaking them with individual funders, they could really benefit from just a very easy standing syndicate fund or a syndicate DAO in which they could just apply to, and then the DAO could make the decisions. We have once a year our annual member gatherings. And so I think we still have the one up from last year. So that was in 2021 Vision Weekend, where a few of you came to. We had one in San Francisco and one in France. Next year, we're hoping to have one in Singapore. And so what we do at these Vision Weekends, our annual member gatherings, we bring the best of our tracks together, including our fellows, funders, mentors, and so forth, and have a report out of what happened in these groups, where it is that they got, who got which type of funding, and just have a little bit of like a community gathering, basically. And our idea is now, or like my idea is now, that what I really want to focus on this year, and I have a few ideas here, but ultimately I would really love your feedback, is on how do we set up a sustainable funding ecosystem for our various projects. So they are everything from our seminars to our fellows to the variety of projects that come out of our competitions. And here's, I think, where I would love your feedback. So here's one potential model that could work. So Syndicate DAO, who here knows about Syndicate DAO? So Syndicate DAO is basically a pretty easy plug-and-play format by which anyone can set up a syndicate, and you can do so Web3 natively, but that has to have only, and anyone can join. Basically, someone sets up a wallet and invites other folks to invest in, for example, NFTs. Now, for startup investing and for this early stage stuff investing, it's a little bit more tricky because you have to be an accredited investor. Otherwise, you can't invest in this proper startup world. But what one could do, and what's super easy to do, and we've basically sandboxed this already, is basically setting up something like a Foresight Syndicate DAO. Then different accredited investors could pay in with this, and that DAO would kind of be sitting there and would come to our workshops and could fund the projects that come out of it, would just fund the fellows that come out of it, would come to our annual competitions and would fund what comes out of it. And so we've had significant interest for this already, and it would be relatively easy to set up. But ultimately, we also want a bunch of community governance, right? Like, I think this community lives really and breathes by the people. And on Syndicate, you can already, I think, have a certain number of the tokens that you get for investing allocated for basically paying people to do due diligence. And you could do this relatively easily by just dedicating that token pool to those folks, and that could even then go into shares in the projects that those people are voting on. But I think this is like the most, like, let's say, vanilla or the easiest one for me to set up, because it's an easy template. They basically create the LLC for you. They do the taxes, da-da-da-da. And like, that's apparently pretty easy. And we've done like that, like we've sandboxed it a bit. But that's, I think, like the first step in DAOs. And we've also talked to Aragon, like them, and there's a bunch of really great DAO models out there that I'm already like, I'm pretty strung out at just trying to matchmake between fellows and funders. And I think, I would ultimately really love your guys' help. If you think that there's a better model out there that we could be using that would be not incredibly difficult for us to set up, then I would really, really love your advice. The syndicate model seems easy enough. Aragon, I think, has a really fantastic toolkit. They have reputation-based voting, which I think would ultimately be much more amenable to this. But if you're keen on brainstorming on this, I would love to. And yeah, there's a form out there already, and if you're interested in the Foresight DAO, and for that, you don't have to be an accredited investor yet, because we ultimately want to explore ways in which, for example, also non-accredited investors and even private crypto, right, could come in and fund a bunch of this stuff. We have a lot of people that prefer to donate privately, and we already take private crypto donations. Ideally, those donors could also fund our projects privately. So anyway, if you're interested in brainstorming about this, I would love to know from you, what are the best financing models? What are the best governance models? I'm really eager to do something more of reputation-based voting, if that's possible. And I'm really eager to also talk about incorporation, whether or not to incorporate in the US, where to incorporate instead, whether the Wyoming law is good, and so forth. So anyway, if you're interested in brainstorming on this, the Foresight DAO, we are currently experimenting with it. We're sandboxing it. It's probably going to hopefully go live sometime later this year. So if you're keen on experimenting with these types of structures to fund early stage science and tech, then I would love to do that. I will take maybe like a few, like 1 or 2 questions in case there are any. Any questions? Oh yeah, over there, Shadi.
Yeah, just one comment, really. So at Offsite, we've been experimenting a little bit with reputation-based voting with Aragon. One thing we've noticed is that once you set it up, you can't really change a lot of the parameters. There's some interesting ways, though, where you can keep so with reputation-based voting, the NFTs the tokens that you assign to users or to members are non-transferable. They accumulate over time as you advance, perhaps, and contribute. And there's some interesting incentive mechanisms that can be at play there. One thing that really stimulates my thoughts on this conversation, thank you, Allison. I think it's really great that you're doing this, that I hadn't really thought much before about is how do we start thinking about layering different protocols together to achieve maximal collaboration and coordination? And I think that liquidity-based pool tokens are really interesting in this way, right? So you can imagine having the Foresight DAO token, which really what you want to do is incentivize those tokens to be put up as liquidity for other tokens, for other projects in Bootstrap. And those that do perhaps engage in governance should be those that have tokenized their liquidity position are providing liquidity, right? So I think there's some interesting ways that you could build baskets of assets, either through balance or just one-on-one pools, and thinking that way of keeping those incentives for whatever it is, whether it's ownership of the project or rewards and so on and so forth.
Yeah, totally. I think it's somewhat complicated because once you talk about investing, then you can only have accredited investors investing in projects, and then mixing between actually the tokens that are voting tokens and the ones that are for accredited investors, that becomes really tricky really quickly. And obviously, we're already pretty out there experimentally with the science and tech stuff, so we don't necessarily want to be incredibly in an illegal territory at all in terms of like how we do the funding. But one thing that I discussed also yesterday with your neighbors is like, it would be really cool to ultimately do more collaboration also across different DAOs, in the sense that you could almost like specialize in things that individual DAOs do well, and then just shuffle deal flow around between different DAOs that fund like relatively similar things. And so that would be ultimately also something I'd be super keen on doing. And that sounds like the more liquid model that you said is quite amenable to this ultimately. Yes, over there.
Yeah, I just check out the Common Stack and their automated bonding curve funding, which would be great. Just if you remember that, then Prime DAO for DAO coordination.
Oh wow, that exists, Prime DAO?
Yeah, Prime DAO.
Who knows about Prime DAO? Okay, do you want to say just a sentence or two? Because only I think 2 other people.
Yeah, so there's that. Well, yeah, so Prime DAO would allow for DAOs to enter into like treaties, enter into negotiations, do mergers, basically like it creates inter DAO coordination tools, right? Even proposal inverters are something they're working on, which is really interesting. Do you want to?
Yes, yeah, and people can hear you. Otherwise, internet out here.
Hi there. Yeah, so they're doing also proposal inverters, which are pretty interesting for funding projects in between DAOs and like just holding tokens to then be distributed at like allocation rates to different projects. That's definitely interesting. I would check out conviction voting, which is pretty great, where you can have many selections. Instead of picking A, B, C, or D, you can 75% A, 20% whatever, and there's like a decay function so that you don't, there's incentives to like hold true and actually be convicted about what you're saying. So at One Hive, they've created like this easy way to create DAOs that use conviction voting in order to make financial decisions and fund projects. For example, GiveF uses this model in order to give grants to just different projects that they care about. Those are all things that are interesting. Also, in regards to changing DAO structure, there's interesting work going on at Blossom Labs where they're creating a DAO splicer, which allows you to splice the DNA of DAOs and have them evolve and change their core functionality over time. All of these things are interesting. I'm sure there's more to talk about, but I think that's at least all I wanted to contribute at this time.
Wow. I hope you don't mind me checking or following up with you afterwards.
Yeah, if anyone wants to talk.
Yeah, thanks. They're great. Okay, awesome. Thanks a lot for the comments. And we are doing some inter-DAO collaborations. For example, we're co-hosting our global meetups across, I think now 8 cities with VidaDAO, with 1729. And so we are trying to do a little bit more cross-DAO, cross-org collaboration. So I think the inter-DAO one sounds interesting. By the way, if you want to join our global meetups, we're now in 7 cities. The next one is on the 26th. And you can go to global meetups and you can apply here and there with a bunch of other organizations and DAOs co-hosted across the world. Okay, any other questions, comments for this on how to? Okay, yes, we have one over here. Do you want to come up front?
I was just going to build off of that and show the token engineering commons as well, which was like the first like token engineering project out of the common stack, where they're using an augmented bonding curve to fund token engineering projects. And so this emerging discipline of token engineering is appearing where they're simulating complex token economies, which I think DAOs are eventually going to really use. And really happy to hear you thinking about reputation-based voting, because I think as an industry, we need to move away from token-based voting, because we can see the dangers of people swooping in and buying a bunch of the DAO's token and then effectively vote. So,
yeah,
really cool.
Look, I think what I said in the panel on Monday is like still really like deeply enshrined in my head, in the sense that there's, there's the best DAO structure in which you could do this, and that, obviously it's more reputation based and it's more community oriented and it's like super decentralized and anyone can participate. And then there's the thing that scientists can wrap their head around and like can get involved in. And I think the more you tokenize and the more Web3 native you make it, the easier you actually lose much of the basic academics. I asked them, just queried them how many are even in Web3, and it's a very, very tiny fraction. So I think there's always these trade-offs actually of like getting it perfectly right on the Web3 angle and then getting good scientists. Okay, Sina.
Just a quick question. I was just wondering how you're first going to start using Syndicate, or is that under roadmap?
Well, we have a sandbox out right now, and we're just experimenting and tooling with different things. We want to just see how easy is it to set up, because we don't want a lot of overhead. Meanwhile, we're super open still on the DAO space, which is why we're doing this thing here. And so yeah, we could be ready to go if we wanted to, and if there was enough drive. But at the same time, I also I did just a deep dive now for a few months in this, but ultimately there may be better options out there, which is why.
Is it for Foresight itself, or a different team?
No, I mean anyone really could. In Syndicate, you'd have to be an accredited investor to participate in, which obviously, like it's not my ideal scenario because we also want lots of private investors and private donors, and we also want ideally folks that, like really anyone who's just a Foresight supporter to also benefit from this. But at the same time, we're also looking for maybe something like that is an MVP, and if it works well, we can then do something that is more complex. But those are also questions that are open. So we have something that is like a nice workable model, but ideally we would want to do something that is more Web3 amenable, which is why I'm counting on all of you guys.
I don't know if you guys heard of impact certificates. It's OA Impact Certified Impact. We're acting on it this week. It's going to be kind of a new thing. But the idea is to make a market for public goods, to make it profitable for speculators and retroactive funding and things like this. So it's kind of related because it might be interesting for non-accredited investors, and it's not really investing. It's more like granting, but kind of retroactively based on impact, things like this. So it's very new because we're acting on it now. But I would love to talk to you about it.
Well, I know of it, but I think for me, at least that's what I thought was the problem with this model would be that you would still need, if you the idea is that you airdrop or you just drop back economic incentives maybe later on for the ones that were early on believed in the project, right? And for that, I thought that at least you got into trouble for that with regulators, because it could almost be classified as a security or as an investment. If you
make it non-transferable, I think you get around that.
Okay.
If the tokens are non-transferable.
I would hesitate to incorporate, I don't know, but like it depends what you're trying to do. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. Maybe I'll come find you all of you in a breakout later. Okay, we have one final comment here, and then I want to give it over to Aaron to discuss tech trees.
With reputation-based voting, is that all going to be on-chain? So everything you do, all of your reputation is based on on-chain actions, or is it going to incorporate off-chain reputation things?
Well, that's a good question. So I think we looked at the Aragon model, which is super neat, and ideally, it's always like whatever you do on-chain is a little bit more complicated because you actually need to onboard those people then on-chain, and those whose reputation we would like, they're not super web native. But yeah, even their interfaces, like having better interfaces for this would be very, very useful. So if you have ideas there, then.
And also, if you're using reputational-based voting, how do you sort of square off the potentially decentralized aspects of it, where you're trying to bring on people who maybe have not contributed in the way that you might expect them to have contributed, but still might have values and contributions to give, but they won't have the reputation in order to have that sort of clout. I can thought about that as well.
Yeah, again, I think that depends on how you do reputation-based voting. For example, you could just sit in the back and issue them reputation-based voting tokens. And that again depends on whether you trade it, whether you have a token traded that's on the exchange or not, or whether you just do it in the back end, as a more private setup. But yeah, so this is why, we were running into all these questions. We're like, well, if we just want to get an MVP working, then Syndicate would be easy enough because it's just for funders. We could get an early, easy model going. Accredited investors could fund our projects. We could basically have a proof of concept that it works, and then we could branch out and do something a little bit more complex. That's our current state of the art. But okay, Uli?
What is your current investors? What's your appetite for this kind of funding? Are they engaging?
Yeah, they want this, and they've been wanting this for a few years now, and we've always been shying away from it. But now I think it's a really good time because now the tooling has just become to a level of sophistication where we feel more comfortable taking it on. But it is certainly a very community-driven effort because oftentimes, they just want more ways to plug in. Many of our mentors are all accredited investors. Many of them are funders, and many of our donors are. And I think just trying to give them a way in which they can kind of get together. And actually, we have a mission statement. We have specific technologies that those people all care about. If there's one thing that makes Foresight donors kind of all in the same bucket, is that they all care about a transdisciplinary approach to technology. So they all care about all of these technologies. It's not some of them only care about longevity. That's fine. But many of them really care about many of the the entire stack basically. And so I think that like just having a DAO that can sit there and in which people can just rally around a common cause of just pretty out there early stage sci-fi technologies, but from really high credibility people, then I think that it would be a good rallying point. Okay, cool. I've taken up much too much time now. If you're interested in this, I welcome you to either sign up here through this URL where you can basically click on whether you're interested in the DAO or they're interested in tech trees and so forth. And now I give it up to Aaron to talk about tech trees, because that's also one of the ways in which the DAO could slot in and fund a bunch of stuff.
All right. Let's see. Does this work? No. Or is it? Test? Okay. Okay. So yeah, the transparency didn't carry over. So this is a little hard to read, but yes. Foresight Institute Tech Tree Project. So my name is Aaron King. I'm the research director at Foresight Institute. You're all familiar with by now. So the concept here is, I'm sure that a lot of you have seen some diagram like this in a game that you've played at some point or seen it in Civ or Stellaris or something like that. The fundamental concept is that there's simple technologies very early on, and then they get iterated on or they get combined together to unlock better technologies over time. And this is a very interesting way of listing out or diagramming technologies, because it doesn't just show you a list of technologies, it shows you the relationships that exist between them. So the idea is like, okay, well, is there a way to use this sort of logic to map out technology in the real world? And it turns out that there is, and it's actually very interesting. So Foresight is responsive. Well, we've got interests in several different domains of technology. There's Biotech, which is more longevity, space, Neurotech, and molecular machines, as well as intelligent cooperation, which is going to be Web3, crypto, machine learning, AI, the kind of stuff that you're more familiar with here. And so the underlying philosophy here is, it goes back to a very old painting, where this is a painting of Aristotle and Plato, and Plato's got his hand, pointing toward the sky, and the interpretation of this scene is that they're arguing, and Plato's like, well, you can derive everything from first principles. If you're smart enough and you have enough time, you can just sit down and figure out how the whole world works and come up with a perfect system. And Aristotle, he's got his hand out in front of him, and he's like, no, listen. You got to get out there into the world. You got to go into the trenches. You got to find out how things really are and then iterate on them incrementally, right? And these are philosophies which are often thought of as being at odds with each other. But the tech tree concept actually does capture both of these together. And it's very interesting because we're going to map out what's currently happening. What is the reality of stuff like crypto or Web3, of space tech, of longevity tech? What's happening right now? And then we're going to have these big picture ideas in the future, which is like, okay, we want to get to, asteroid mining. We want to get to things like 200-year lifespans. How do you actually get there? What are the concrete steps along the way? And this is where the tech tree concept comes into play. There's going to be certain ideas that have more robust logic behind them than others, and we'd like to know what those are. So the features of this whole tech tree concept is a digital, constantly updated map of technologies, a comprehensive list of companies, labs, and advocacy groups, basically everybody who's operating in the sphere and what pieces of technology are they particularly involved in. We want feedback from domain experts. So as we draft versions of these trees, which we've already started doing, we go out and we ask them, we ask the people that are at the peak of the field, does this look right to you? What would you add to this? And then we do bottleneck analysis. We find out what the challenges or bottlenecks for progress are, what's stopping people from moving forward. and then figure out how to flood those particular pieces with support through decentralized bounties or crowdfunding or other ways of supporting, trying to figure out solutions for these things. So we've got a pretty good team assembled so far for the initial round of tech trees. One lead for every domain of research that we're looking into. So molecular machines, we have Yuaning Feng, who's a postdoc at Northwestern University. He's part of the Stoddard's mechanostereochemistry group, who is a Nobel laureate. Neurotech, we have Marina Polyakova. She's a researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences. For intelligent cooperation, we have Yingtong Lai, who is currently a senior engineer at Electric Coin Company. She's also used to be involved with Ethereum. For Spacetech, we have Romain Fontaine, who's currently working at the European Space Agency. And then for longevity biotech, there's myself. I've been involved in longevity projects for a very long time and currently the research director for Foresight. Yeah, so we're making good progress on this. We've got a bunch of domain experts contacted already. The initial team has been assembled. We've got some prototype tree scaffolds developed for various different tech domains. The online tools are being constructed. There's also there's different variations of them, and that's tied into the Maps challenge, which we can go over later. And already it's only in the initial stages, but there's already like very interesting sort of information coming out of just organizing the technology this way. And so some challenges and goals have already been identified, which people just didn't think about before. And we've got collaborative prizes being set up. So longevity prize, stuff on Gitcoin. There's other areas of collaboration that are occurring. So this is what the manually drafted prototype, one of them looks like. And then here's one of the online tool prototypes. So this is a dynamic version. It's got like a graph database on the back end, and on the front end is this custom rendering software. So it'll draw out the tree. So it becomes very easy to just keep pushing information into it. And then you don't have to like manually rework it every single time. So it's really important. This tech tree project, one of the most important things is that it stays as a living document. And that it doesn't get obsolesced over time. People have been making roadmaps for forever, right? But after 2 years, they get obsolesced, and all this work that went into figuring out how things are and the current state of the art, it just goes out the window because you have to draw a new roadmap, and it's very difficult to do these things. So if we can get a digital, automated system to keep it up to date all the time, then that'd be really cool. So we've got Gitcoin bounties. So we've got, and these are not quite approved. I don't know if there's anybody from Gitcoin here at the moment, but so they were submitted just recently. So I'm assuming that they'll get approved pretty soon. And we've also got, yeah, so I guess that's about it. Oh God, I left the notes in. But yeah, so what I wanted to say at the end of this was that there is a really elegant way of incorporating crypto tech. I'm not sure necessarily the currency side of things, but in terms of the technology, decentralized computation, validation strategies, smart contracts and stuff like that. There's a way of elegantly incorporating that into this whole this whole project that we're doing. I can see it very seamlessly coming into play where we have this giant tech tree, we have all the different technologies there, and you've got QR codes or some way to integrate where you can directly interact with the effort that is going into trying to solve every single one of these pieces of technology. And there's like certain aspects of crypto just really ripe for this particular project. The concept of staking and all the technology around that, being able to stake your support to a specific problem or a company trying to solve a problem or something like that. There's all sorts of like pieces of the technology that just seem like they line up very well. So this is my contact information. And I guess I'd like to just get anybody have any questions about the project or yes.
Hi, I think this is really, really great work. I love what you guys are doing at Foresight. I had a question on establishing buy-in from academics, right? So how do you recognize a particular node on the tech tree as agreed upon? And are there any plans to kind of think about how we could put knowledge literature graphs on the back end of that?
That is, okay, so there's the foundation of this, which is what I'm currently thinking about, but there's also been tons of ideas about layering additional filters and features on top of this in the future. So for academic buy-in, right now I'm doing it manually. I just know a lot of the scientists in the field of longevity, so I actually can just go to them and be like, hey, does this look right? But we want to have a seamless way that doesn't require them to, learn a whole bunch of crypto jargon or anything like that, but a way that they can push their opinion into the tree. And then there's some kind of a validation mechanism that goes on, right? That's decentralized, some kind of thing that allows it to get merged together. Right now, we're basically just using GitHub and stuff like that, but there should be a way to do that, and I'll ask you about that later. But
yeah, just at least from what you're saying right now, this sounds like the perfect use case for conviction voting, because you could have multiple branches of possible tech paths, and then be more convinced that one is valid over another.
Exactly.
Ones could flow that way, but without being all in or all out of any given research path. So you could keep for all the possible and impossible futures. And yeah.
So the point that was brought up for anybody who didn't hear that was conviction voting could be used for this. And it seems like a very good use case for that mechanism. And I think that sounds really good. The other point that you brought up was academic literature. So I've thought about this in several different ways. One of them is that the nodes right now are objects, and you'll be able to click on them, and then it'll expand into like a subnode where it just shows all the different strategies that people are trying to use. But the lines can also be objects. And what the lines actually do, what they represent is a statement of saying, okay, this technology is connected to this other technology. And you want to ask why. Like, why do you believe that these two technologies are connected together? And we can get into the whole thing. We can put in all the different reasons why in terms of like sourcing all the academic papers, the scientific experiments. You can see a whole list of here's why people believe these two technologies are related. And then here's all the experiments that seem to disagree with that. And you can have them all just pushed in there and just listed out in one place. And it'd be very, oh man, it'd be, from an academic perspective, it would just be so like fluid, because you would be able to trace the logic of like why people believe what they believe all the way back down to like the root of just, where the root concepts for the whole field. And you wouldn't have to go pouring through reviews or everything else, trying to tunnel through layers of papers to find out where the original actual observations came from, right? So
yeah, just to apply. So in neuroscience, there's a really popular tool called Neurotech, and it does that. It provides these Bayesian updated rules on what you could search for any semantic token in the database, like pain. You can pull up what the current agreement in the field is, what the neural signature of pain is. There's like a whole bunch of caveats.
What is
Right.
Neurotech.
You mentioned adding like filters or layers or like the next level up. I think open philanthropy has really good terms for this. They bucket their things with importance, neglectedness, and tractability. I think that's just as important, because it's good to know the change, but it's good to know what's the most important parts of the change, what isn't getting the most attention, and what we can probably push on easiest. And then you can kind of like bucket those things together. And then if you say, oh, something's really important, it's really neglected, and we can really be a lot of levers, like that's where the focus should go, right?
and that's a great idea. I want to make it a little more tangible than that, just because it's like, how do you know what's neglected, or what metrics are you using? So when we do filters, and it's been suggested, and we have our own ideas, and there's other people that have ideas. There's going to be filters for things like how much financial support is any particular technology node getting. There's going to be how many people are working on the problem. There's going to be filters for also like political or regulatory hurdles. How much regulation does any particular field of technology have? And that should inform us. It should allow people to come up with their own conclusions about what is under supported, or what needs more attention, or what types of attention it needs. But yeah, the filtering things, generating heat maps, so we can take a look at the tree, and you can see at a glance, like maybe there's giant swaths that are just completely, or maybe there's a whole part of the chain that's very supported, and there's one crucial piece in the middle that just, like, for some reason everyone forgot about it. That'd be very interesting. Sorry, any other questions? Yep.
So you mentioned previously about value flow between different nodes connecting aligned with each other. My question is, like, do you fear that it could potentially lead to something technocratic? Like, who gets a voice and say, this is where we should direct the value flow? Should it be left to the expertise, or to those in the field who have that level of expertise, which there's maybe some sort of pros and cons associated with that? Or should anyone be able to say, regardless of the quality of my opinion, this is where at least I believe strongly this is where the value should flow? Like, so who gets that sort of governance power over where to control directly?
That is a very good question, and it's one that doesn't really seem to have a strong answer. I don't know if you.
I have a few ideas also. So I think that, and that's what Evan also will talk about, I think, in a second. But so Biotech is exciting, is what he already mentioned. You have top down and bottom up in the same structure, in the sense that, for example, if you build something out, like there's this 4-minute post that we wrote on just basically I guess a bit more of the philosophy behind it. But if you build something out, right, we want to build something out that is really quite decentralized and is a little bit more agnostic as to what the different technologies are. So let's say this is like one of the tech trees, right? That was an earlier version. If you click on any of these nodes, those nodes unfold and give you advocacy groups, labs, companies, and then the Gitcoin bounties, or maybe even projects where basically for a node, different projects could apply. Like we're already asking domain experts to put challenges out, then different projects could apply for them, and maybe the DAO sits at the end of it and actually funds that as an investment arm into the best projects that apply. So there's also really neat ways to integrate that. But we are more interested in the more decentralized version thereof, of just mapping the entire space. Maybe even in an ideal world, have something like prediction markets on it, where you can, and we are already, we're talking with Metaculus, for example, which is a prediction market that's pretty, or like a prediction service that is pretty close to Foresight in terms of its humans. And so that's already one that already has a great community going. And so they are pretty good in predicting. So that would be the massively decentralized layer. But why a few other people got excited, for example, Balaji, first, Trent McConaughey posted this, and that's the graph or the map, which is basically like a pretty top-down way of structuring a path from here to the Dyson spheres. And so that involves a variety of different areas. But, I saw his and I was like, okay, that's like close enough to what we're trying to do, or at least it could chart a path through the tech tree that we're laying out. So we'd be laying the foundation of a bunch of different labs, of a bunch of different challenges, without really too much, without too much of a specific trajectory. And then different funders could go in. For example, Balaji has this SIF tree that is more based on something that he wants to invest in, right? And so this would be basically that every funder could almost have their, like basically a funder looks at the different technology trees that we've drafted for Biotech, Nanotech, Neurotech, and so forth, takes these technology trees and then drafts their own path through the stack. And that becomes part of their almost individualized path through the forest of tech trees that we're building, right? So there's layering this up, you can have really nice features on this, but first we need to build the foundation. And that I think should be as decentralized as possible, and should also be as, let's say, somewhat agnostic still as possible, so that different different ideas, as you said, can live next to each other in parallel, and then the different people, depending on how much traction they get, can split off. And so that's ultimately why I contacted Balaji, I contacted Trent. I was like, hey, look, we're all trying to do similar things. And that's why we came up with the maps map that Evan is talking about in a bit, where all of these folks are judges on. But yeah, I want to say one more thing, which is there is now a first prototype that you can, so Aaron already mentioned that you can already interact with this, right? And so one of our collaborators has built one of the first prototypes that you can already edit. And so all of those are linked, by the way, from I don't know how, this is not perfectly rendering, but in an ideal way, this is already like a very, very crude version, right? But just to show you some of the functionality, you could hit edit mode. On edit, you can edit any of these slides. You can put in a new node, you can put in a new highlight, you can see whether it's a core technology, a longevity tech, or general improvement in that space. You can then hit submit, and then on the back end, it gets pushed to our domain experts that sit in the back end, so that we're already trying to make it as collaborative as possible. And this is one way in which we're doing it. And then the challenges. So we have these seminars that I presented on a little bit earlier, right, that are bi-weekly. In every one of these seminars, we're already making it like a question for our domain experts of just like, what is the number one challenge that you want solved to see your area move along? And we're always taking that as those seminar summaries as an input to then expand on the tech trees, and the challenges, the best challenges that we get through these seminars will then become Gitcoin bountyable challenges on the tech tree. And so it's a really neat way to just build it as a back end of our programs that we run throughout the whole year anyways. And so, yeah, okay, this is me stuffing, but.
Okay, so one of the reasons, okay, the prototype is up online. The rendering of the way that the rendering works right now has some slight difficulties in terms of like pushing things over horizontally. So I didn't want to share that yet, but that's okay. The edit mode does work, and it pushes it to GitHub, and then those changes will get, like, we can compare the changes and then merge them or not. But yeah, this is one of the tools that's potentially we're going to be using. The Maps challenge is supposed to be generating a wide variety of options that, we'll see, which ones look the best.
How do you deal with disagreements, or what people say, no, this should go first?
Yeah, so how do we deal with disagreements? And that's come up. So far, we're pretty early in the process. We haven't seen any yet, but I'm sure that we will. And the thing is, there's different ways of approaching this. Okay, so there's the whole multi-worlds concept, which is basically like you can like fork the whole tree and then be like, okay, this expert thinks that it should be like this, and then this expert thinks it should be like this, and that gets really confusing really quickly. I don't like that. I like seeing connections where you can see like how much confidence there is in any particular connection. I like that, and we'll just have to see as we move forward with that what solutions might emerge. Sorry, you're gonna have to either come up here or speak louder.
I was just like thinking as you were describing this, and maybe it's like not for the MVP of like the initial Foresight DAO, but this almost seems like it would be a perfect use case for sub-DAOs, where each node of this tree could essentially be its own DAO within your.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Okay,
so actually,
that's a lot.
Well, so we were talking about when we discussed the Foresight DAO, we could either have like, for example, one big DAO on top and then have different domain DAOs on the bottom. That like those are fast DAOs, I think Aragon calls them, or like on a different level. But you could even have individual, for example, parts of the tree tokenized where you don't have bounties on individual challenges, but you actually have a DAO sitting not only on one tree, but on each of the different challenges that researchers pose. Because many of them, let's face it, like, for something like organ transplants, there's challenges on there that each of them require basically a funding DAO, and it's not just to fund the entire stack. And yes, we are probably going to have a token workshop on this, maybe at ECC in July. But that's also something that other people that work on the text tree and maps, which Evan will talk about, also care about. So this would be more of a complicated model, right? Because you literally have to like basically create an ecosystem for every one of the challenges that you do. And we want to get there, but we want to start also somewhere where it's still like somewhat approachable.
Probably not for the MVP.
Probably not for the MVP, but it's definitely on our heads already. Yes, because it's more sustainable than bounties. Okay, cool. Let me just.
I was going to sneak in and add to that. around a lot of these nodes, there are already communities for those. The question is, how do you get the team working on this specific problem within that particular subfield of the science to coordinate and use and interact with the rest of the global map and each other on some platform specifically. So,
and okay, so we're gonna move on to the maps map, to Evan's presentation pretty soon here, I guess. I guess, yeah, I think that's about it for now. We might have more time afterwards, but we'll just.
Well, you can take one more question because I'm still trying to get it up.
Oh, okay. We're gonna take one more question because there's some technical. There we go.
I'm in academia, for better or worse, and we're all busy. I'm a weird one. I don't know if there's any academics here, but I'm here.
Right.
Most people I talk to about crypto in academia are 50 to 70-year-old white dudes.
Exactly.
Who barely operate their email. So, like, how big a staff? Like, it sounds like you're trying to decentralize grant funding, more or less, in a way that provides.
Well, there's that aspect of it, and that's could be, we'll see how far that gets.
So, sorry, my question is, how big is the incentive that you're thinking about to have academics participate in this system? Like, do you have a ballpark?
Incentive-wise, there's not much that we've generated in terms of like trying to like pay them to give knowledge for this. Basically, the way that I'm seeing it right now at the current level is that we do the grunt work. We have to go to them. We ask them questions. We do all the difficult parts of it. They just have to tell us, any kind of public-facing information that they want. And we're starting out with public-facing information. This is all the stuff that people want other people to know already. But because of the chaos of the world, it's out all over the place. It's in piecemeal, everything's fractional. Everything's just, you get one little snippet of the truth here, another there. And it's like, let's just pull it. Let's do the grunt work, pull it all into one location. And then it's just sitting there. The entire string of knowledge or logic is just laid out for you. Here's everybody who's involved in it. All right. Sure.
I would also say that I think there's like long-term goals around decentralizing more of grant funding. There is a like fundamental order of scale or issue of scale where like the US government spends $100 billion every year in science funding, and like it's really hard to crowdsource that. That said, a lot of what the US government funds is based on things that have been shown to be effective or safe, often by private funders or foundations. And so if we can organize like foundations that really care about impact and some young researchers who are very interested in novel technologies and their use for accelerating scientific fields, I think that could be enough that we can start a transition where I don't see success as all grant funding goes through something like this. I see success being that we have national funding entities who are saying like, oh, these ethics guidelines that we're setting up for BCIs, like the way that we recommend that you as an EU member country frame these is in the form of a roadmap. And so we can integrate this kind of thinking probably in a diluted form, probably in like a much more accessible form, but we can find what the most important pieces of this are and get those into the establishment, because there's an amount of mass like there that is nearly impossible to leverage otherwise.
And with that, I will officially hand it off to Evan. So thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Let me adjust this. Thanks. All right, so I'm Evan Miyazono. I did my PhD in experimental quantum optics, specifically applied physics, and or I guess generally applied physics. And I am a member and friend of Foresight Institute and a judge for the Maps Map competition, which is this competition around building a platform, open platform for these roadmaps so that anyone can make them. A lot of what I'm going to say was already discussed in the last two talks, but hopefully this perspective will be interesting, and I think I have a few things to say that will be significantly value add. I might switch between calling these roadmaps versus tech trees, because I came to this problem completely independently of the Foresight Institute. And when I found out that they were running this competition, I was like, great, you're farther along than I am in a lot of the deployment. I've done a lot of thinking independently. Let's merge these. And it seems like it's really exciting because there are a lot of people who are coming together at this time, taking the tools from decentralized coordination and pointing them at science and scientific progress generally. So part of what's interesting, I think, is that most of us, if not all of us, know generally where we want the future to go and what we want it to look like, but it's really hard to find images, like robust worlds of what we want the world to look like. And part of that, I think, is because it's really hard to extrapolate. Well, I guess part of it's that media makes it very difficult to tell a compelling narrative in a world that doesn't have conflict. But you also have that, I think it's just harder to imagine technology extrapolated in a good way when we are often surrounded by people who are trying to point out all of the ways that current trends could go very badly. And so I see this math map competition as part of a like hope punk, solar punk effort to create a shared vision around what a good future could look like. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend this, this talk from Charlie Strauss about how corporations are the original AGIs, and they are very much paperclip maximizers. And I absolutely love this comic of, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment, it created a lot of value for the shareholders. I feel like there's a lot of alignment here, and it's growing, that the modern structure of capitalism, where we are just maximizing profits, tends to create bad outcomes for humanity. And I think it's not that people are setting out to do these things. That people don't want to make technology and products that exploit their users, usually. But at some point, you kind of get lost in what you're doing, or you're staring at the next step, or you only have a really bad metric. I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with Goodhart's law, but there's a claim that any metric, when used as a target, ceases to be a good metric. And so if you have like daily active users as something you're trying to maximize, maybe it's good to keep track of how compelling your content is, but as soon as you start trying to maximize that at cost of all other things, you end up in a very problematic situation. And so there are questions around, how do you track progress without succumbing to Goodhart's law? I would say that misunderstanding, lethargy, and risk aversion are huge motivators when you look at society at scale, and you have these incentive gradients where everyone's trying to do the thing that's most optimal at the given time. And because people are looking on very short timescales, because they're not able to be or empowered to be risk tolerant and look on longer timescales and take these bigger risks, you might have situations where people end up in these local minima that are not, these local optima that are not global optima. And I make this claim that a lot of times humanity seems to be sleepwalking into dystopias. I think that there are some really interesting there is a lot of interesting writing on how society seems to be very broken and create these outcomes that no one would actually choose from the outside, but everyone acknowledges are surprisingly hard to change because systems have such big inertia. And so this is generally just my plug for complex system science as something interesting. The Santa Fe Institute has a great podcast if you're not familiar with it. And I guess also cybernetics is a term that you've probably all heard, but may not have linked to the fact that it is this, like, how do we merge technology and society to create better behavior of that combined system. There are a lot of people, as I was saying, who are interested in trying to map out where we should go. I love that almost everyone who has come to this has referenced tech trees from Civ or other computer games that map society's evolving. I think that there is a particularly compelling flavor of this, and this is less of, I think this is probably less shared globally by the map judges, but I think it's super interesting to think about some paradigm shifting technologies where like a highly effective brain-computer interface or a artificial general intelligence, or even like a like gigaton scale carbon capture, where its development will impact most aspects of most people's lives. And you can take an analog of a light cone where like this is, if you're unfamiliar, it's an interesting concept that's worth reading the Wikipedia page about. Generally, the idea is that because the speed of light is essentially the speed of causality in the universe, you can map out all of the things that could affect one particular event and all the things that event could impact. And if you generalize causality to technology in the space of technological innovation, then you end up with this really cute idea of like everyone involved in this one breakthrough should care about the path we take to reaching that breakthrough and all of the impacts and repercussions that that breakthrough will have. There are ways you could have a DCI that is very empowering to users, and there's also a way you could have one that is very exploitative. And so with that, I found out about it and became quickly very enthusiastic about this competition. It is a competition to create an app to crowdsource and crowdfund and generally coordinate collaboration in a decentralized way. I think decentralized and permissionless, ideally, way, where you have some specific features and that the judges deemed would be very helpful. The judges being people who have been thinking about these kind of tech trees, specifically these individuals. And it's, I think, very, well, I think that the vision that we've developed has become very compelling to people who want to use modern coordination, like decentralized coordination techniques on technological development. And so a natural question would be, why have a competition for this? Why not just, like, if we all care about this, why not take the prize money and fund a developer agency or something? One is that I think that we as judges are a bit strapped for time. And so and may not have the relevant skills to build a very user-friendly app. We tend to be people who are more associated with coordination and vision building and consensus building rather than product building, in many cases. Additionally, I think we expect that people really developing a sense of ownership over this product and taking, like, I guess if you hire a dev shop to build a product, then when they're done, either they're done or you keep paying them to maintain it and improve it. But if you can find someone who is interested and finds this use case compelling, then all you have to do is promise them users and a potential use case and a way in which they can continue to raise funding from, I guess, probably some sort of donations or tithing on the future platform. And you can now have a clear sense of ownership where someone will be optimizing this continually and have dedication to making sure that this effort succeeds. And so trying to find people who are either entrepreneurially minded or want to have that sense of ownership over this tool as, to some extent, an outcome within itself empowers the judges to leverage this tool and pursue the outcomes that we want to see this used for. Spacing got a little messed up. I think that it's worth noting that these tech trees are particularly interesting because I was recently faced with the question of why fund a particular tech tree effort around gigaton scale direct air capture and mineralization of carbon versus one specific technology. And I love the answer that I received from this other team that's building this active roadmap around climate, saying, if you fund a roadmap, you're not taking funding away from the effort. taking funding away from a specific technological breakthrough, you could be increasing the overall funding pool, because having clarity in this space makes it much more compelling for other investors to come in and identify specific things they want to fund. And I think that there's a huge potential for collaboration between funders, researchers, entrepreneurs, and investors, where usually there are information asymmetries that are admittedly like systemic and exist for a reason. Chesterton Spence, like you should know why these inefficiencies exist before you try to claim that you're going to get rid of them. But I think that for areas specifically where everyone's motivated by the end goal, in addition to or even more than the path getting there, I think we can overcome some of those inefficiencies. And so for like your average, like a randomly selected researcher from academia, I don't think that this planning might necessarily be sufficiently compelling. But if you find someone who is in climate and has sacrificed like higher paying jobs because they care about the problem and they're like ideologically motivated, I think that there are many fields, and I feel like Web3 and crypto is one of them, where people care more about building a better world they want to live in the distant future than increasing their share of the pie in the short term. And I think that there are aspects of a field that make some areas more conducive to that than others. And so I think it's very important to acknowledge that when you apply these tech trees, it's probably best to start in those areas. But it's also amazing to go. And I would definitely recommend taking these two questions and asking them of researchers that you know. Anytime you're talking to a scientist, ask them what important problem is no one working on, but for no good reason? Or like, what would you do if you could get funding to do it, or to do anything? I haven't come across a scientist who didn't have a very compelling answer for this, or very compelling answer for what they would want to do, and a very frustrating answer for why they feel like they can't do it. And you'll also find that there are many scientists who have submitted proposals to get funding to do a thing that they've already done. And like, this is an information asymmetry or inefficiency that I think when you have a field of ideologically minded funders and researchers, you might be able to solve that by just giving them a coordination tool and convincing them that giving up their advantages, giving up those particular advantages, are worth the value of reaching our goals faster, our shared goals. And so I think there's also a valuable question of why now? Tech trees have, like the idea of tech trees have at least existed as long as these civilization building games. And I think that there's a really great answer of like, this community now exists where we have convinced ourselves with hard evidence that you can organize far more efficiently in a very decentralized way than you used to be able to. And so I think that there have been great demonstrations of networked science generally, but we don't necessarily have the tools. And now that we have the evidence that it could work, if we build the tools, I think we can bring that to people and convince them that this effort could be successful. And I'm super excited to see what progress looks like in the future. Also a question of what makes roadmaps hard. And I would say that this makes them interesting epistemologically. There are definitely some robust questions you can ask about how you describe future technologies that don't exist. How do you address the fact that there are unknown unknowns about the development of technology, things like that. So there are questions like, what types of problems are most conducive to roadmaps? What level of detail do you specify a node? How do you like provide a user interface that gives a dynamic level of resolution in the same way that Google Maps does, but with user-generated content? These are questions that we hope the competition will help us answer, because we have okay answers to some of them or hypotheses about them. But I think that it really takes some like real prototyping and experimentation to figure out how to do these. And as part of like, some of you might be interested in the outcome of the competition. Some of you might be interested in participating. For those of you who are interested in, but like deeply skeptical of this, I wanted to highlight that there is a $1,000 bounty if you can tell us why this is like epistemologically fraught or like probably unattainable, and you can give a very compelling reason or like constructive criticism on how we should rescope the problem if you think that this is something that is too ambitious but could be made like reasonably ambitious but still useful. And so we are open to feedback, either positive feedback or constructive negative feedback generally. And then a short pitch for what I am personally doing. This is things that Protocol Labs research is doing. We're in the process of renaming ourselves to Protocol Labs Meta Research or something like that because of the amount of research we do about research as a system. But we are interested in also developing novel mechanisms to incentivize nodes, like breakthroughs on these tech trees. We have an event coming up on March 3rd and 4th, Funding the Commons. I would claim that the outcome of the Maps Map competition will be a common good. And I think that the breakthroughs that arise from those competitions will also be common goods. And so there's some general interest from a lot of crypto in how do we fund more of these common goods, and what this conference and what these relevant discussions will be specifically focused on is how do we find novel methods of funding and accelerating these breakthroughs. Aaron had said that part of the goal is to flood potential research breakthroughs with support, either like logistical, operational, financial, et cetera. And I think that there's a really interesting question of like, what are all of the ways we could do this? Because I think grants and bounty programs are great, but I don't think they're sufficient. I would highlight this meme that I love, that science, the process, is very similar to software that runs on the firmware of people. And people have bugs in the form of cognitive biases. The interactions between people have bugs that are not dissimilar from distributed systems bugs. And so, most of these bugs are specific to either the people or the communities. And so you can't just take one set of incentive mechanisms and throw them at every given field and expect them to work in all of them. And so we're interested particularly in creating customized mechanisms to accelerate specific fields. And I think that this is knowledge that, is very important and kind of underemphasized. There's a big community around meta science generally, and some fraction of it is specific to how do we make science more reliable. And then there's also some that is related to how do we make science more efficient or faster. And most of these are very discovery focused. And I'd love to use the outcome of the MapsNap competition to make that much more experimental, because I think that I feel like the crypto community is particularly interested in and willing to run weird funding experiments and see what works. And so I want more weird funding experiments. I have some funders that I'm talking to who are willing to put money behind weird mechanisms. If you have weird mechanisms, come talk to me. If you have potential funders, come talk to me. If you have things that are unfundable currently, also come talk to me. Overall, here's my content and information. You'll see a link to the MapsMap Discord, as well as a link to a very early stage Protocol Labs. Well, it's not Protocol Labs specific. We're inviting other communities interested in network science to host a small number of channels here so we can have some more shared decentralized community. But I would definitely recommend joining. The latter is definitely in early work in progress stages. But if you like talking about things like hand-launched razor or getting weird meta research articles, we have some great ones. I think one of my most recent favorites was a discussion around a blog post about extracting knowledge from the citation database and graph, and pointing out that it is intrinsically fraught for many reasons. And it was a very spicy conversation because many of the people that we had in it were actively working on knowledge graph projects. And so it was, I can promise some amount of interesting thoughts and ideas if you're interested in coming in and joining. Other than that, I have a list of random recommendations seemed to go over well at a previous talk in case people were interested. And I would love to welcome the other two speakers back up here and we'll take some questions. Thank you.
We already have a good sense of Q&A. Are there any questions for us? Ideally, come to the front of the mic. But also, just yeah.
So like, I was not familiar with the field of decentralized science before coming to Denver this year, and I missed some of the talks on it, but I'm really curious about like what the approach to peer review is like.
Well, for that, actually, we have.
We will have a session almost dedicated just to that starting right after.
For those catching the recording, I will add to the microphone. The question was about how decentralized peer review could work, and the answer was it's an interesting topic that will be covered in a session later today.
It's also okay. Oh.
When is the maps competition?
Currently ongoing. I don't remember what the deadline is actually.
So it started a few months ago. The deadline for the first submission is the 1st of March. And so at that point, so we have 60K in total prize funding, and that's distributed across a few prizes. I think there's about almost 50K really just for the main winner of this, then 10K for special features. So for example, if you're like really into replication markets or whatnot, and you build like a specific thing like that for something that could operate on MapsMap, then maybe that's something, you know, that wins the special feature award, then there's a 1K bounty. But for us, like what we have done from our community, like basically once every Tuesday, we have these community calls with people that are competing. And one thing that came out of it is that many of them are really actively interested in being part of a longer term community. So after the first prize is done, ideally we want to support projects that come out of this forward to actually build out this tool. So the first one that is finished on March 1st is really just for a prototype, to show us that you could do it, basically. And the more sophisticated, obviously, the better, but you don't have to hit all of the features perfectly. And then from there on, hopefully, we can make this more of a long-term community run effort.
And I'll add that all of the submissions have to be open source, and so we should have great collaboration and forkability on all of these. They also need to be able to allow people to, actually, I don't remember if it was a hard requirement that anyone can add their own, like anyone can fork the state of a tech tree and generate their own nodes and have some ideally very user-friendly mechanic for merging them. And so they're like, definitely think there needs to be a way for multiple people to have their own active state, because different people should have different views around how the technology will unfold.
I had a question about kind of how we take adversarial things like peer review or things that are, you know, seen as kind of conflicting in modern day science, when it's a constructive sparring, right? So in martial arts gym, you're training by fighting, but sometimes in science, we're, you know, just fighting. And I know like some of my colleagues, at least in neuroscience, they have this life goal of finding an academic nemesis. They'll know they've made it. So I'm just curious, you know, what are some of your thoughts regarding grant-making games and coordination games that spar in a constructive way?
For those who didn't hear that, the question was about how do we have intellectual sparring without like enmity within scientific discussions. And I think it's a really important question for decentralized collaboration and coordination. I think that one of the most important things is clear alignment on the top priority being the long-term goal. I think that there are a lot of fields of science where, and I think that modern grant-making paradigms have exacerbated and fostered this like framing, this like strongly zero-sum framing. If I get the grant, you don't. And I think that you could change that with novel funding mechanisms. There are things you could start doing where you have, like you set up, you talk to mechanism designers or like game theorists and realize that you could set up funding situations where it's more clearly, well, I'm going to say more clearly a cooperate dominant strategy. I can't say that this isn't being done actively, but it's difficult to try to propose propose that, I imagine, within these national science funders, or like propose more radical steps towards that. Generally, I think that building alignment on the long-term goals and outcomes, especially for ideological areas, like I would have been far more surprised if you had said that you knew scientists who wanted nemesis in the field of climate science, because I think everyone there knows that the nemesis is CO2. I'm serious, CO2. And so finding that is, I guess, starting with areas like that becomes becomes easier. Starting with a lot of younger scientists and convincing them that we can we can work together and increase scientific funding to a field if we do more sparring, if we show more progress. At the end of the day, I think these systems are all humans, and it's important to recognize that like the mechanisms that you employ can at best influence the humans, but building a sense of community and shared ideology and like morality or values is probably going to be the most valuable thing that can be done, but that has to be done slowly and at an individual level.
Got a question back there.
The question is follow-up. So now that metaverses are becoming more practical, why is it better strategy instead of creating math, creating the underlying metaverse, then the math would be
Actually, we had a submission that is already trying, and someone is already trying to do this in VR. So that's one of the folks that joined our last office hour. Yep.
I'll comment on that. So the back end is going to be a graph database, and the structure of that we can probably allow people to just build like APIs or something to directly access that back end, and they can just generate their own view of what it is. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is like get all the data together, and then you can have various layers of interpretation for that data. Is that something else?
So I was going to repeat the question, a bit of the question. For those who didn't hear, it was around, now that the metaverse is gaining momentum, why not make why not use the metaverse for these tech trees? Why not generate and house these tech trees in the metaverse? But you're going to add a clarification.
build that environment where people can create neighborhoods and cities that work in such problems in such a role, then maybe the mayor would be my force to just
My personal answer is that I strongly believe that there's some like three-dimensional, more interactive version of a tech tree that would be much better than the kinds of things you could get in 2 dimensions. I also have a set of very strong opinions around what the metaverse should be. And in my mind, it's not dissimilar to I guess I see it as an iteration of the web. I almost see the metaverse as Web 3.1, where like there's a lot of features from the current internet that we've found particularly valuable, like collaborative editability and cross-domain identity. And when we take those and ideally make them decentralized, permissionless infrastructure, but infrastructure nonetheless, at some point we will have a 2D metaverse where every web page is some collaborative location in virtual space, and then we can just change the dimensionality from 2 to 3 for those who have the hardware to access that.
Okay, I think maybe we can take this offline. We don't want to run into the next session. I just also want to say, we're 2 people that come to this challenge. There's a lot of other judges, like Balaji has a very different vision. And there's a few folks here also, like every one of these judges came to this from a different angle. They all want to see different things in this tooling. So we presented the Foresight tech tree vision of this. Evan and Protocol Labs, I have a slightly different angle. And then there's a bunch of other judges too. So we don't want to give the opinion that, we're speaking for everyone here.
Yes.
Those are just like our own, basically what our communities care about. But that's also ultimately completely what makes this tool so amazing, because ideally a bunch of different communities should be able to use this for many of their individual technology and project mapping, right? We want to use it for tech trees specifically to map specific ambitious tech goals. Other communities may want to use it for a bunch of different things. So I guess want to preface this with this. And I think we now have the next session coming up with Eugene. I do want to say, if you wanted to get involved in the Foresight Tech Tree, the Tech Tree and DAO efforts, you have here the QR code basically brings you to a Google form. On the Google form, you find our Discord, and you find the longevity tech trees and the tech trees that we are trying to do, including also the Gitcoin bounties that you can already support the challenges on if you seek to do so. Then there's from there, it links to the tech tree post, and this is where you find out about all of the different tech tree efforts, including the one on the Maps Map Challenge. So there's a bunch of different link dives, I guess, but here it just explains a bit on what different judges care about and where the hackathon is. The hackathon, again, has its stop date on March 1st for the first one. And here you see the judges again. So again, a big link dive, but I think in the interest of time, we will hand it over to Eugenia for the second DeSci session of today. And I think the last one of our track, right?
Yeah, the last one on this official set of events, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
My computer. Perfect. And just for anyone who's just coming in, please feel free to grab some swag in the corner with Maria from the Scurf team over there. And we also just have a taco bar that got set up. So if you're hungry for an early lunch, please feel free to grab that while we're getting set up here. We're going to have all the slides will be up here. I'm going to talk briefly. I'm going to hand it off to one or two people, and I'll pull up their slides. And we're going to need to shift to a panel, which I guess is going to be more of a standing panel, because I don't see how we'll conveniently transition to sitting in a short amount of time. It is what it is. At least we'll get some exercise as part of it. But yeah, that seems. So it'll be one of those fun rotating who's actually up kind of things.
And so I killed the mic for a second, so sorry about that right before your announcement.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
Yes. I was wondering, I feel like something. I'm guessing it's going to be like. Yeah, not a party, it's a workstation, right? Like the goal is to not rage. The goal is to have energy left.
Okay. We should probably tell people, because when they say not party, they think you're like, hey.
No, I'm very clearly articulating like this is a work session, which is why not party makes it sound like it's meant to really be a party.
I mean, we should tell people it's ham, because I think they're under the impression that.
I don't know exactly when, because we're gonna go from here. We're gonna go bouldering and check in at Shelling Point a little bit.
Okay, so I was like 4 or 5-ish.
Sorry, party this week. I don't know about party, but we're gonna host some of the core DeSci dinners over at the school. We're ready. Just a lot lot of energy and buzz around it. I thought it did. Oh, did you? Shouting out the Friday event as well.
Say what?
I'll be shouting out the Friday event as well.
Cool. Yeah, I got to talk to Allison to get all that sorted out. Looks like we're doing like some speedy lightning talks or something.
Yeah, because I know Allison was mentioning maybe we can give some like updates for what's coming of all this stuff, and there's a chance we might even have a DeSci DAO to announce on Friday.
Oh, sick.
So, yeah, we'll
very, very, very cool. That's exciting. Yeah. I got to talk to Allison. Honestly, all this stuff, like, I would love for this to be much more like actually involved in it. So
yeah, for sure.
You guys are doing awesome work. I got to play here.
Let me slowly start wrangling.
Give a little presentation and then do a little Q&A.
Another guy PR will give a presentation, and we're going to do a panel. What is unfortunate with the current setup is that we're going to have to do an offer. Whoever speaking goes here and then hands off to the next one. Not ideal, but maybe we can.
So,
let's see if we can do
just
something.
make sense. Talk about the mic setup.
Yeah.
Okay, so ideally it would be great like while presenting if you use this mic, because this mic will also like capture the live stream. There's that second mic, you can like hand that off to other people if you don't want to do like musical chairs for whoever's in front.
Yeah, how about we do that? Because that way one person can say something and somebody else can respond, and then we'll have two.
Yeah, and then just only one face will get captured here, but we'll figure that out. Or maybe we could just
we can zoom it out slightly. Can we?
Yeah, we can just stand a little
further.
It will be possible to move up the mics a little bit. Not right now, but like once we're done.
Streaming audio gets captured here.
Yeah.
We're just talk loud.
Yeah. We'll project. Yeah. Project. Yeah. So we'll stand back and we'll pass along those mics and we'll make do with the Yetis, or like we'll see how well it picks up.
The panel will be Jack, me, and Kelly. Somebody else?
Jack, you, Kelly, Allison, and then.
Oh, so we got a whole crew.
It's gonna be a kick-ass panel.
All right,
I'm very excited.
Let's do it. Yeah.
It's gonna be
It's gonna be good.
No, you're good. We're gonna see if TR is here, which I don't see him here.
Good. Excited.
Yeah.
I even got some notes ready because it's funny that on actually Foresight
Yeah, sure. All right, I'm just doing a quick mic check. We are going to be getting started shortly, so please do feel free to grab some food for now. There's taco bar in the corner. There's swag. I get that people are going to be moseying around for a little bit, and so I think we're going to go ahead and give me a 1 clap if you can hear me. Give me 2 claps if you can hear me. Give me 3 claps if you can hear me. All right, great. We're actually going to be getting started now. So please feel free to grab food and swag. Just please keep the conversation lower so we can start focusing on the presentations and make sure that we can get through all of the scheduled programming for today. So first things first, thank you everyone for joining, whether joining us physically here in Denver or joining us remotely. And I actually just want to start off this session by giving another big thank you to Allison and the Foresight crew, as well as Shadi and the OpSci crew for all the other events that have taken place. Let's just give them a round of applause real quick. Lovely, lovely. And so let me just give you all an agenda of some other events that are taking place around DeSci activities here at ETHDenver. So if this is the first DeSci thing that you're catching, good to be aware of what else is coming up after this session. So hopefully you're aware of where you are now, which is a discussion on aligning incentives in research and review. We're going to hear, well, I'll tell you the agenda in a moment. After this, a number of DeSci folks are actually going to go hit a bouldering gym that's like 3-4 blocks away from here. So if anyone does just want to do more of a DeSci social, come hang out, do some indoor bouldering, find one of us. We're going to go to the spot around 2 p.m. It's really close by. I have some guest passes to give away. And apparently ETHDenver has some like cheap thing and free rental stuff set up. I don't know the exact specifics, but we'll get in as many people as we can. Yeah, sure. You want to hop on? Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually for the whole week. For anyone that's at ETHDenver, the spot bouldering gym is right over here. It's a few blocks away. Just show your wristband, say you're at ETHDenver. It's a $20 day pass, and they'll give you shoes for free as well. And there's a meetup on Friday at 11 a.m., just an ETHDenver bouldering session on Friday over at the spot.
Perfect. Thank you, Colin. And so, yeah, that'll be sort of with this event, as Allison mentioned, we are wrapping up this series of, this is actually our 7th event, including our social. So this is wrapping up this series of 7, but it's not the last thing pertaining to DeSci happening. So I'm going to be on a Governance panel. We heard from Livia Deschamere from the Governance group, as well as TEC and some other projects she's involved in. But she spoke about Governance yesterday. We'll be talking about governance research in the Jonas, whatever that venue is called. I think it's over there, somewhere not too far away. It's where the NEAR group set up all the co-working space. And then on Friday, there's a DeSci and Space panel with Dane, which might now include actually quick lightning talks from Allison, myself, and Shadi as well, to recap some of the exciting things that have been discussed throughout this week on the DeSci side, and to kind of flag where we're headed beyond this as well. I'll also be on a public goods panel called Public Goods Are Good, which sentiment I agree with, but I'm going to be on that panel on Saturday, so that should be fun. And then for anyone actually heading up to Breckenridge, we're going to do some kind of last minute social or potentially even group work sesh once we're up there. So definitely let me know if you'll be up there. If you're not part of, actually I'll have a QR code for the Telegram group in the moment. But beyond all this stuff happening at ETHDenver, we're going to do a Twitter Space conversation within 2 weeks. You could either follow myself, Scurf, or any of us that are active here. You'll see us tweeting about this DeSci community call, which we want to do as a regular Twitter Space online. And we really want to encourage anyone who wants to host public conversations on DeSci, use this tag. This is not like our tag. This is a general community thing. And as you can tell, if you missed the presentations, I think we've had almost 10 to 15 different projects in the space of DeSci present so far this week. So we have a really amazing, energetic community forming around this. And we want to give everyone a chance to have their voice heard, whether you're here, if you couldn't make it to Denver, we want to make sure there's chances for everyone to get involved. We're going to have a virtual kind of like half-day DeSci day at some point in late March, early May, or early April to get more presentations from folks. And around ETH Amsterdam in late April, we're going to be planning at least a single day, if not a 2-day DeSci day dedicated just to DeSci, where it'll be some presentations and some much more functional breakouts and work sessions together. So that should be either April 20th or 21st. Details to come on that side. So yeah, these are 2 things. If you're attending here and you love POAPs, and I'm guessing that there's at least a few folks here who are POAP hunters, feel free to grab one. This is actually yesterday's POAP. So we had some troubles with it now, but it should be working. You'll have another POAP for today's session, and then you get 2 lovely Scurf POAPs. And the other QR code here, which says DeSci at ETHDenver Telegram group, in case you couldn't guess, is for the DeSci at ETHDenver Telegram group. So if you want to be aware of any conversations happening here, please hop in. And I have a feeling we're going to generalize that DeSci group to just be an overall DeSci Telegram group well beyond ETHDenver. So yeah, it's not too late to hop in there and be part of the conversation. So this POAP is one that is for today's session specifically. So both of the POAPs that Scurf released, we were expecting a lot less people when we put these together, so we only have 100 of each. But yeah, that was not sort of intentional scarcity, just we weren't sure how many people were going to show up. But yeah, feel free to grab this one too via either the QR code or just the secret phrase of research. So today's agenda is we're going to have 2 independent researchers presenting. We're going to have Jack Yin presenting, and we're going to have TR presenting. I don't know if TR is here yet, and we might need to do some last minute moving things around because he's presenting at a different session and they got backed up. So we'll see where he gets slotted in. But at the very least, we're going to have Jack present on some of the research that he's done on index co-op and governance there. And then we're going to have kind of a meta level discussion with Allison from Foresight, with Evan from Protocol, with Kelly, Dr. Kelly Page, who should be coming up here shortly, as well as Darren Zhu from Adams, all somewhere around here, and Jack himself. So we're going to have a panel on what does actually providing peer review to independent researchers look like, which we think is a very relevant conversation, given just how much of the Web3 space has been built by independents and not necessarily coming out of academia or corporate. So especially as this motivated community of passionate DeSci individuals, how do we really think about providing review, whether it's informal or less formal structures. And if you're here today, I'm assuming you're interested in DeSci conversations. You should probably be aware of our bounties, which if you follow that QR code, you'll get to the total of 4 bounties with a total of 12K in DAI from SCURF, the Smart Contract Research Forum where I work. The largest bounty that we have available is 6K split, 3 in person, 3 virtual. That is actually specific. All of these are non-technical, by the way. So if you don't code, perfectly fine. These are white paper-based, written-based bounties. The biggest one that we have, relevant for today's session, is what does open peer review look like in a reimagined situation, right? So if you're going to be inspired by the kind of conversation we're having here, including the panel and then the group breakouts actually discussing some of this in more detail, perfect follow-up would be to check out the bounties and potentially write something up. And you could win, if I remember correctly, the largest bounty for the first place one is going to be 1,500 DAI. So some decent sized bounties out there. And our goal is really for this to be the first step in collaborating with anyone who wants to be part of this and us all building this kind of resource as a public good and as a community. Because especially from my perspective and overall at SCURF, we're really thinking, what does open peer review look like as a public good, not as something that's monetized, but something that is freely available to any researcher anywhere in the world. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop talking, and I'm going to hand it off to Jack Yin to present on some of his research. So please come and introduce yourself while I pull up your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello. You guys hear me? Yeah, good, great. Okay, my name's Jack. I'm a Jackie Poo on the internet. Trying to centralize around that identity. If you want to look through the slides, there's a QR code there. But everyone got it? Everyone got the slides? Okay, good. All right, so who am I? So I have a background in analytics and data science and startups. And basically I got introduced to Index Co-op, which is a DAO that runs crypto index products. And I started doing work for them. And as I was doing work for them, I realized, like, okay, the way that DAOs are run, the way that these decisions are made is very interesting. And I think there's a lot of peculiarities about the way that index co-ops governance and index and token distribution happen that can be illustrative when talking about DAOs and token voting in general. So the structure of what I'll be talking, the summary essentially of what I'm about to tell you is essentially that DAOs have very low voting participation. And so their governing systems can actually be captured by minority activists. And through, data analytics, you can measure this threat and surveil this activity with on-chain data. The structure of the talk is going to be, first I'm going to talk about the theory, like voting theory in general. Then I'll talk through what I found and then sort of zoom out a little bit and then talk about DeSci in general. And since a lot of these slides are going to be kind of dense, especially if you're not familiar with voting theory, if anyone wants to ask questions at any time, feel free to raise your hand. So there's a lot to talk about. Okay, so the theory. Most DAOs use one token, one vote. And this is robust, and I think it's a very common selling point for people. But it has a lot of known issues. Vitalik talked about it. And one main issue is capital inequality, means that voting power concentrates in the hands of a few. And the second thing is, since votes are all on-chain, this enables bribery and collusion, because if you bribe somebody, somebody can prove that they voted the way you wanted. The third thing that is not endemic to one token, one vote, but is true empirically, is that DAO governance systems have low turnout. So that's the third thing I want to focus on. So these weaknesses imply two ways to capture a governance system, right? One is you can either have all the tokens and you can vote and make decisions by yourself. The second way is by bribing people. I am going to focus on the first, right? Collusion is also a problem, but it's a subset. Like you can have a sufficiently decentralized voting, constituency, but still end up with a lot of collusion. So I'm just gonna ignore that. I'm just gonna talk about single-handed capture. Okay, so let's talk about how an IIP index for the index co-op is made. This is like an extension of a lot of different IP processes, like EIP, like Ethereum Improvement Process. They also have something similar, but essentially you make a proposal. All the voting is done on Snapshot, which is an off-chain voting system. You can use your tokens to cast yes or no. And then if the total votes on the proposal reaches quorum, then the result of the vote is binding. And if doesn't reach quorum, it has no effect. Now, what is quorum? Quorum is essentially like the amount of people who participated that lends legitimacy to the decision. So the example I want to give is in June 2017, Puerto Rico had a statehood referendum. And 97% of the voters in Puerto Rico voted yes, they wanted to be a state in the United States, but only 23% of the Puerto Ricans voted. So is this sufficient quorum? Is this a legitimate decision? Is 97%, is this a binding decision or not? And I guess most people said no, right? But I kind of want to draw attention to that because that quorum is a very key aspect of why there's vulnerability in the first place. So yeah, so index co-op has a very low quorum. In general, we take 5% of tokens, of floating tokens to be the minimum amount. For important decisions, it's 10% of floating tokens. So that means that you don't actually need to capture 60% of the active token distribution. You only have to capture the voting token distribution in order to capture the voting process. And you need this kind of low quorum because if you set a quorum really high and no one's actually participating, nothing gets done. So this is a compromise that has been made, right? In exchange for more flexibility and faster movement, you also kind of enable low voter participation. So what am I looking for here, right? So essentially the methodology when I'm trying to measure how dangerous or how captured a voting system is something called a critical voter. And this is a term that comes from voting theory. Essentially, if there's a single person who can change the decision of a proposal by themselves by switching their vote, then that person is a critical voter. So imagine like a 100% unanimous yes vote, right? If one voter owns 60% of the stake and they switch their vote, they single-handedly decided to switch the whole proposal to no. And so notice that this definition for critical voters implies that if you have a split decision, right, you can have if you have like a, let's say 50-50, right, you have many more swing voters, right? So many voters can then are then critical voters, which implies that if you have a lot of critical voters for a proposal, it's probably less of a problem. But if you only have one, that represents centralized power. Any questions on the theory, voting theory, et cetera, what I'm looking for, any of that stuff? Yes?
Instead of just having one critical voter doing 60% of the supply, so you could also have like two critical voters who individually they have like 30% of the supply, but combined together they have 60%. Would they still be flagged as like critical voters?
Yeah, all voters are treated independently. And so in this case, like the way I'm looking for critical voters, I assume that every other voter does not change their vote. So I'm not looking at coalitions of like these two people would together be 60%. What could happen is like both of these people could swing it by themselves if you're talking about like a 50-50, but then both of these users have like 20% or something, right? And that would also show up. Yes?
And so you said many critical voters is unproblematic with having one for decentralization, but would having no critical voters, like a high percentage of what switch decision by themselves, be even better?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, you can think of that as like, for example, like an American like presidential election, let's say, right? Like a single voter, a single individual voter is likely not to be the single individual swing vote for a state, but certain states might be swing states for the presidential election overall. So like, yeah, in an American presidential or like a one person, one vote situation, you don't have any critical voters. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about what we actually find, right? And the structure here is I'm going to talk about index co-ops token distribution, and then I'll talk about what happens like historically in the actual votes. In the token, and I want you to focus on specifically the amount of tokens that contributors own relative to capital, let's say the investors. So 78% of tokens cannot vote. They're vesting, they're locked up in contracts, they're locked up in the treasury. 22% of the tokens can vote. So what that means is we have 10 million tokens overall, maybe 2.2 million tokens are votable. This is the distribution of what those 2.2 million tokens look like. And in this case, that blue sliver over there is the amount of tokens that are held in known contributor wallets. That's 2.2%. The combination between the green and the orange are like venture capitalist and investor tokens, right? So that's about like maybe a quarter, let's say 20%. They own the outstanding amount. And then the other gray, this is the 75% of tokens that you don't actually know who owns it. These aren't wallets that we have tagged. So what does this imply, right? This implies that there's a tension between contributors who have only 2.2% of the total votes, who actually do all of the work, and then the token owners, who are the investors or the people who are farming, liquidity mining, et cetera. So you have, and quorum is only 5% of circulating supply, and the contributors are extremely active. So they end up being very overrepresented in decision making. So it's not actually useful for us to say, oh, you know, if 30%, if like 30 of the addresses that we see collude, they can dominate the whole voting process, because that's not what happens, right? We don't have 60% of the voting population voting on things. We only have 5 or 10%. So we actually have to look and see historically what has happened. So what I did is essentially, I went to Snapshot, I pulled all the voter level data, and I classified each proposal. And I just, for each proposal, I look for critical voters. What do we find? First of all, a large number of proposals fail to reach quorum, right? Depending on the category, which is not so important here, many proposals just fail to reach quorum. And then of the proposals that do reach quorum, half the time they have critical voters who decide how this is going to go. So if that person had changed their mind about how they wanted this proposal to go, they could. Then we can look into, you know, who these voters are. You only have 9 voters who are ever the deciding voter, right? And one voter in particular, which we know who they are, they're one of our key investors. They are the deciding voter every time they voted. So practically speaking, we're working for them, right? This is not really a decentralized org at all. We are working for these specific guys who are activists. And so after like seeing this, I have some recommendations around, you know, what we should do about it, but that becomes like less scientific, right? So I kind of want to just move past that. Any questions about like kind of the methodology, how we found what we're looking at here? Cool. Okay, so in that case, oh yeah. So here's the transparent part of these things. Oh, yes. Yes, but they have 10% of the total stake. So like what's interesting, so they have, you can sort of see here, it's very small. They have about 190K votes, right, out of 2.2 million, right? So less than 10%, right? Which does not imply that they should be dominating the voting process, right? Normally you expect someone to have like much more than that, but the truth is they do. And kind of this is what I want to flag, is that you can have these minority activists that don't have like a majority of the stake, but still control the whole process. Okay. Right, so as we start shifting into kind of talking about decentralized science and how and what this is, like everything I've published, everything I've created is all entirely public, right? These findings that I made are all on the Index Co-op governance forums. All the code and all the, you know, the data that I pulled is all in the Index Co-op analytics repo. And so if anyone is interested in this sort of thing, you know, feel free to reach out, you know, help you fork the code, all that stuff, right? And what I kind of have, the questions I have for DeSci in general, as we kind of move to the rest of the topics, essentially are, one, what does it look like to validate research outside of traditional scientific institutions? Because the research that I've been doing, kind of, it has a lot of the ideal scientific, you know, components, right? It has a clear thesis, clear data, clear methodology. It's reviewable. However, there's no decentralized peer review system that can give everybody else the confidence that my work has been reviewed for bugs or whatever, right? Nobody else knows, like you gotta just have to trust I did it correctly. And we don't have any institutions there. Another thing I want to ask is, like, what does funding look like in DeSci? In this case, I happen to be a contributing member of Index Co-op. So I took an interest in this research topic, and I had like a stipend because I was a core contributor. And I'm honestly, if I had said, hey, Index Co-op, I want to work on this project, can you pay me for it? They would have said no, most likely. So is there a way to create like a sustainable funding ecosystem in DeSci? And the third thing I kind of want to leave you with is, how do researchers, independent researchers, connect to collaborators, prior work, existing theory, that sort of stuff, right? I kind of did this, again, primarily in isolation, just out of my own curiosity. And, you know, I don't have anyone to talk to. I don't have any way to like validate a lot of the stuff that I was doing or the recommendations that I made, which is kind of why I left it out of the presentation. What does a independent researcher community look like? And yeah, and I'll just leave it for general Q&A or just thoughts in general about any of the stuff. Yes. Okay, the question is about Gitcoin grants and funding. Yes, well, I've been looking at it in a bunch of different ways. Some of the research organizations I've been looking at, for example, like MetaGov, they are funded by Gitcoin. So like a bunch of different organizations are trying to do these sort of things. But I think Gitcoin directly might be a little bit trickier. I could do that, but I feel like my gut instinct as someone who has not done Gitcoin grants is that it takes a lot of like marketing for yourself. Like I have to market myself and get other people to donate to me, and I don't want to do that. Yes.
So one of the projects we're working on is to answer that question about funding in DeSci. So we realized that a lot of time is spent on grant writing, whether it be traditional or with Bitcoin. And so we want to be able to take out the middleman there and allow for a funding platform where investors and researchers are allowed to have transactions between themselves directly, just like you would with any other type of investment.
What is the name of the platform?
It's called Synet.
Synet. Okay. The comment for anyone on the stream is that there is a platform for connecting funders and researchers called Synet. Yes, or what? I don't know. Anyone else? Yeah. Okay. All right, Eugene.
Yeah, thank you again, Jack.
Yeah.
So we are now actually going to be transitioning to a panel discussion. And it's going to it'll be an awkward panel discussion because we're all just going to have to hover and share mic space over here. And can we move the mic back a little bit just to, yeah. So do you mind helping out with that real quick? So we're going to be getting started with the panel. And today during the panel, we're going to have Allison Duderman from Foresight Institute. We're going to have Darren Zhu from Atoms. We're going to have Evan Miyazoto from Protocol. We're going to have Jack Yin, who just presented. We're going to have Dr. Kelly Page up here as well. So yeah, please, for the panelists, please feel free to come up here. We'll do a quick round of intros, and I'll be moderating the discussion. And I actually don't mind I would rather have y'all more like visibly out there. It's okay if my voice is coming from the
formulating some questions and things.
So beautiful.
Because last time we had a little decentralized science panel, got a little too decentralized. So
Yes, very,
we need some coordination here.
Yeah.
Too much is a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, thank you all for joining. So we just heard from Jack. So I'm just going to pass the mic around real quick so that everyone can introduce themselves, and then we'll get into more of a meta-level discussion on what does providing review for independent researchers look like. And actually, I'm going to start off with segueing from what Jack was wrapping up with and what had come up with a comment of sort of that question of funding and incentive alignment. But before we get there, let's go ahead and just pass the mic around for some intros. And I guess to be fair and start first. Hi, everyone. I'm Eugene. I'm the head of operations at Skirt.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Page. At Norgo, we've been working in digital tech, visual learning for probably 18 years now, recovering academic from institutions of higher education. Obviously not from here, but definitely from here.
I'm Miyazoto. Background in academia, I have a PhD in applied physics, and have been in hardcore crypto startup mode the last 5 years or so, supporting research associated with Bitcoin and getting into dabbling in another research and these good scientists.
I'm Andrew. In various biotech startups in the area for a decade. We've got excited about opportunities for Web3 to realign incentives in science funding and publishing. Put out a little manifest last year at Atoms.org, and have been working on some projects in central peer review with the Neurotech Foundation and chatting with the folks at Local Labs. It's been a great guy to think about opportunities for decentralized science.
Hi everyone, I think I led the session today on DAOs or early stage science and tech funding of non-like biotech, neurotech, and space, and including the tech which Aaron over there is so the tech for mapping out these spaces. Foresight President and CEO, which is a nonprofit for early stage science and tech development.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm really excited to have this discussion. So on the one hand, it's definitely amazing gathering in the DeSci community. And we've heard from a number of folks, like someone asked the question in the last session, like, yeah, I never heard of DeSci. So it's just wonderful to actually gather folks together to highlight that project. I'm really excited for this panel to actually get into more of the middle and more of the middle of, there are tons of independent researchers out there, right? This whole industry is open, most independent researchers. And how do we actually start providing a review as a community, assuming we actually know we want to have review in the first review, and that's going to be its own question. Folks are more or less receptive. So I want to ask you all to start the question when you say funding, any point or whether different platforms like Sign or upcoming, the role of reputation as it relates to individuals who are either conducting the research or review. Do you see the needing to figure out how to codify and capture the reputation for providing reviews as an important step to creating an open system for your review? Or is that kind of like a false place to start thinking about that?
I think reputation is a really important part of it, right? I think kind of a little bit about what peer review currently serves. And one part credentials system, right? Of saying was the research, was the methodology or analysis actually valid? It's also a curation mechanism of saying, is this research actually relevant for the sort of audience that we want? And it's also a sort of evaluation that potential value of it. So all those things help recruit reputation. I'm actually curious to get maybe Jack's motivation for sharing this research as somebody doing this independently in terms of how much of it was a way to start building reputation within this sort of index ecosystem. But I think reputation is a big part of how peer review works in the science world right now, and will definitely be a mainstay in the Web3 world.
I really like the model of science. Well, while you could talk about knowledge being this tree of knowledge that everyone in science is adding leaves to, there's also a competing model, or at least complementary model, where science is a conversation. And for the most part, in many ways, I guess it's a better way to model it as multiple conversations, but there's probably one main conversation that has that takes place amongst conferences and scientific academic journals. And it's hard to say that something has made it as an idea if it isn't picked up as a topic in this conversation. And so it starts really illuminating how much the system of science is a human process where like ideas stay alive and get implemented because they keep getting brought up in conversation or built off of. And that is intrinsically based on reputation. And it's really challenging to have evaluation of ideas by people who don't have all the context who aren't in that conversation, but then those are also the most biased people. So it's intrinsically like a wicked problem to try to solve reputation in science generally.
Yeah, I think just pivoting off that a little bit, I asked a question around reputation of what and who. Currently, our peer review system is based on reputation of institution, reputation of journal, reputation of the academics, and only the editorial ones, right? If you look at our existing peer review process. And the current peer review is an entire invisible labor network. So we don't actually know the reputation of those who are actually reviewing the papers that are getting published, right?
Sometimes you do because the field is so small. You
and also there is a practice of citing yourself multiple times during citation. Right? So I think it's really important because we look what we mean by reputation and what. And there's also reputation around the topics we're writing about as well, right? So what does that look like? So I think reputation is incredibly important, but currently in the current model, it's not visible, it's invisible. So there's an entire invisible model that we need to make open, which is why I love OpenSci and everything you're about, because if we can crack the system, we can see whether it's exclusionary, what is the diversity, because right now, as far as my experience, we're centralizing to the West, we're centralizing to male academics and male scientists. I think we have a lot more work to do to really open it up. So for me, reputation is about a number of factors, not just an individual researcher.
English speaking is another thing.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. Centralizing.
I guess I think definitely I run our work to a lot of advisors that this is pretty reputation based, but it's a pretty small system, so I definitely depend on top of it. But I day-to-day life, yes, for sure, I certainly guilty of this. I want to say that, especially for something that is super new, bootstrap implementation is pretty difficult. And I think that was something that also was brought up in our previous channel, just like, okay, how do you actually award that for something that hasn't really been done properly? And I think that even though that's much more complicated, but things like prediction market or replication markets could over time perhaps build a little bit more of a decentralized way, coming to a few of the factors of reputation that we care about. At the same time, yes, I think rely on it on a day-to-day basis. And I think Balaji, that was one of the concepts of decentralized social networks, but he was also talking about the big problem, like if you switch from one network to another one, you kind of have to have a way in which you have multiple reputations, right? Because otherwise, you never even one current domain, because you build it up and to serve it in a new system is pretty difficult. And so how do we make sure that organization stuff doesn't minimize the fact that there isn't much reputability done and working on it?
Yeah, as I was looking for spaces to kind of socialize the work that I was doing, what I noticed was basically feeling in the dark, right? Just crawling and seeing what was there, who was there. The main thing for me is everyone's sort of analyzed, right? So just kind of, if you don't have these existing institutions, like existing research institutions, very hard to find people who actually care about the same things you do. So that was the biggest thing that I found, right? Like once you find people who, once you can see the work that they do, you can quickly validate like how valuable I am this person is, but not that person, but the work. But like because everything is open nowadays. But it was just finding the first place.
I was going to say one other thing that my reputation is the notion of identity, and sort of conventionally, a lot of peer reviews in science is done in sort of stigma-like fashion, where the reviewer identities aren't disclosed to the researchers, but the researchers' identities are disclosed. How there some experiments recently on double-blind review, and what sort of the emergence of Web3 and the acceptance of pseudonymity as a norm. I think perhaps an interesting topic to be a little bit more into is how we have these reputation systems that are also sort of pseudonym compatible, also resistant. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting experiments in sort of decentralized identity.
Absolutely, and for those who missed some earlier presentations, there's a group here through Offside that's actually working on the EID project. You can kind of try your yacht over there if anyone wants to learn more about that at a later time. But yeah, there's very think about certain aspects of this here. And I think segue into another element, we can start taking deep into just the reputation question, how to bootstrap reputation, what about the markets and mechanisms around that. But in my mind, that's all part of the future visioning, longer term conversation. That's not how we're really actually go today. And I really want to try to keep this panel around it and trying to think of what are next steps beyond us all getting together as passionate enthusiasts on this topic. So I know you mentioned in your own experience, Jack, how just getting started, there was a lack of clear community and a lack of clear onboarding into that community and a lack of understanding, like, here's where you get started. And it's kind of just up to whoever just is the most motivated individual to swim through that uncertainty and to actually get somewhere where they feel like they can conduct some research. So I wonder, in terms of, right, we clearly have a bunch of people here, I know there are a bunch of projects who can make it, but what are the actual steps towards creating that more open community? Is it literally just having a Telegram group where we all look at that? It feels like that's a little overly simplified and would be just by everyone within the first few hours and then never track again. So how do we actually functionally create an open community to make it more accessible? First, for researchers who can at least have peers who are also struggling with the same problems, even if not looking at the same domain.
I think like in terms of we build our communities, I can just say what the model that we're starting very small invitation-based groups, which you invite a few people, they then don't have to make others outward, and then you have an application form that people can be accessible, and you do a lot of reviews, and you do gradual onboarding, and you actually, and I have onboarding process everyone who applies to our groups. They're like 12, 15 minutes long, and I just give them the moment to actually like interact with the rest of the group as if they were not family, but like a team of expert people. And I think that like actually onboarding them person by person and letting them know what it is that you're doing and that they have the power to do so, and then starting small and actually going outward, while at the same time also actively, that is really, really tough. When we do our competitions, I spend most of my just trying to get a more diverse crowd in the room. So at the same time, the nomination system often gets you like a small crowd, but we divide these small groups and then have a larger, a little bit larger community, and then have a larger, more like a made in this space community. So I think like having different tiers perhaps works best, so that people can be spotted into the balance and make most sense, but can also swim up or downstream as they please.
I think it's also really important to do something and make progress. And Alison said about that. Of course, I made a lot of progress on these things, but I think that really helps. And if people are starting generally, sometimes people tell Telegram it's useful to have something you can pull up and point to at a small way.
So I 100% agree. I'm glad I raised the diversity things. I think it's something. I think that we have diversity from like a diffusion problem. Because the world is diverse, research is diverse, but it's how we create those systems. For me, it's around funding. Be very mindful of who is funding your work, your research, or your community, who is involved, because that also very much influence the direction that goes in and what research goes in. Two things I always look at in research is method and who funded it and how it's conducted before I even look at the results. Because at the end of the day, if those two are biased, then I don't believe whatever the research has developed. And the other thing, making it an open system, 100% agree on really looking at the different platforms that we're using and how we're using traditional value-based norms for evaluating researchers. So PhDs a long time ago, you didn't get them at 20 or in your 20s or in your 30s. It wasn't a credentialing system that was run by an institution. You would have a lifelong career of research. And your peers would get together in the 70s and garner you as someone who has a contribution to impact. So I think looking at how we're the credentialing systems actually invites us to focus on individuals who can afford to go to college and afford to get certain research qualifications. There are researchers that are working in the field, especially in the developing world, who are actually doing the research that someone else has their name on. So I'm a big believer in proof of work and the people who are doing the research to keep it open as much as possible.
Go ahead.
No, I'm happy to thank you all for chipping in there. So I think one of your next step, an action step there is we'll be happy, especially in the DeSci community, to let's just start capturing who's actually doing independent research across all these communities that is looking for some kind of resources. And we'll separately reach out who actually wants to contribute directly to peer review and start building that list. And connected with groups like Seeds of Science, where they're doing peer review all the mailing lists. They have 100 people around the planet who are doing like 100 peer review really informally to get this mailing list. I know Adams is working on cool stuff in that direction. Research Hub with Patrick and Warren back there, they're doing some really interesting work around it. So we have different groups that can funnel that information too and start collaborating. If anyone here has other thoughts, I'll loop it over to Q&A in a bit, but also make sure you can chat with us later so we can figure out how to get you involved. But I kind of want to transition to what you brought up around the funding side, because I think earlier we mentioned some transparency around all of this. And with transparency, I think it's something that is a loaded term, especially in these circles, and can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So let's start off with funding and transparency, and then we'll get into the actual transparency of who's doing the review. But when it comes to funding transparency, well, I guess to ask kind of a bit of an opposing question, is there any reason to not have full transparency around showing where the money is coming from around research? In your mind's eye, is there a reason why it doesn't make sense to actually keep close to who is providing the funds to support a research project?
Many donors want to stay private.
Just your anonymity.
They just want to do it forever.
Yeah, I always find that interesting. I'm always curious why.
Because like for them, it's kidnapping threats. Right? It's like actually
but you're talking about individual donors.
Yeah, individual donors. Sorry, like that's the kind of Foresight funders. So like we do take private donations, but that's mostly because they care about the person's safety.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though to look at because it comes down to identity, reputation, and interests, right, in the research. And then what are the terms of the funding? If they are anonymous, do they have can they dictate certain things around the research? So funding for me, when I was very young, I learned that if you want to know where the power is, follow the money. If you want to know what the power values, follow the money. So it was really important for me in my research. I fell into a research project in my 20s that was all around the impact of for my cigarette advertising on Twitter, basically. And what was interesting is I was a very junior researcher. I was literally just doing data collection and so forth. And I quickly found out there was a tobacco company that was funding research. So I was fortunate to be able to get off that project. But I think it's really important to look at the interests behind the funding, and also what are the stipulations over the funding, on where you publish, how you publish, who's involved, and so forth. So, for example, I don't ghost research. There are researchers who get paid next to nothing to ghost research for other people, and that's another way funding works for research. Once again, it's an ethical thing. You should know which lenses are on the research. For me, a research project should have a minimum of 3 lenses or 3 perspectives in doing research if you truly want to start to decentralize it, firstly, and also make it more diverse. So trying to really look at your funding streams to make sure you have multiple, and also what's their stipulations over how you spend it and where you publish.
Had a prior note on one reason funded by want to be anonymous. There are areas of the funding that I think are less globally agreed, that are like socially acceptable. There are things about like genetic links to intelligence. And like that is a very, very broad area, but there's like it's broad in all ways, in that if you're not doing it, it can also be problematic because you're assuming that everyone has equal ability in a certain area that they might not have, and you should be providing support for it. It's almost like you're pretending to handicap that doesn't exist. And so like maybe people would fund that, or they fund psychedelics research because they care about it, but they can't have their name associated with it without these social repercussions. And so like there's a very blurry spectrum from that into like a lot of weird, unsettling pseudoscience. And like even those 2 examples might be in that gray area.
There's a really interesting process on atom spend or you really called the bonds. And so, for example, when I go up and talk about baronics, like I should maybe also the next sentence talk about BCIs. I think here you can do it, but like in normal communities, it's difficult. And so, as a funder, if you already are coming back and want to get more publicly, then maybe you have to do it privately. At least for a while until it becomes absolutely stable.
I think the whole element of the researchers' notion of other sort of conflicts of interest that are incurred when you have funding involved, and I think that's something that's worth considering. There are also sort of intellectual conflicts of interest, relational conflicts of interest, and so I think sometimes there's to some extent on this need for funding transparency and conflicts of interest. The other element of funding and the relationship here that I think about is the notion of these bounties to encourage review, and sort of there's a healthy systems of bounties that have been in the engineering community most recently. Optimism has $2 million bug bounty that came out, right? And that's a strong incentive for people to provide code review and reveal a big bug. And so I actually think thinking about mechanisms and incentives for why people want to provide peer reviews is another interesting place to dive into. In the biotech world, there are often folks who are digging deep into a lot of these small cap public biotech companies, looking at their data. There's a recent controversy around a neurodegeneration biotech here whose founders worked with the lead asset actually was basically fraudulent. 50 figures, and so somebody had put out sort of a report about that and sort of tank the company stock by 50% sort of in a day. And so some of these mechanisms can also be sort of market-driven ones. I know people talk also about replication markets, prediction markets for reducing research. So sort of, I guess, a little bit tangentially related to funding, but thinking about larger mechanisms that for driving independent researchers that want to provide peer review.
And I think it'd be really exciting to see a lot of small experiments to show that these things work, so that we can start convincing larger scale funders to try things like this. Because at the scale that we can crowdfund these, because they're only really good at crowdfunding proofs of concept. They're only really good at experiment proofs of concept.
Yeah, regarding transparency, I mean, because transparency is coming out where, because especially the idea where, especially rising, it feels to me that whoever has someone or has the money can
has full power. That's kind of what I'm talking about. That's kind of what I'm talking about. I'm not saying don't have ownership. You can do what you're trying to do. So we can design a scope. We can devise the studies on it. Still, doesn't allow them to influence the research.
And so I guess on transparency from a different perspective when it comes to something like review and the question of whether we will personally believe in that full open peer review where everyone should see all of the results that come up at every stage, or similarly, are there times where it is beneficial to avoid certain interpersonal squabbles entering in at least from one direction, granted out from the other direction, it's not private on the receiving end it is. So yeah, what are your thoughts on certain actual viewers themselves being anonymous going on, both in existing science or if you want to think of a future version of whatever way someday, or just some future version.
I think there are major pros and cons of both. Unsurprisingly, I think there are potentially really interesting Web3 solutions that you can imagine where I, for instance, have like some people that I would love to share my calendar with. They're like view access or write access. Some people that I want to share documents with, and go through and do like all individually. I could do this for like comments on different papers or ideas, and you don't want necessarily everyone to see all of your ideas because you want to have a very frank conversation that's critical that you have more easily if you're trying to care about, focus on being constructive and not hurting people's feelings. But also you want to be able to have easy conversations with the people that you want to spar with intellectually. And so I think that there's some opportunity for some fantastic user interface where you can run a classifier locally on your machine and have it suggest you should give access to these people. And I think that this particular UX would be super interesting for reducing abuse of the metaverse because you don't want to necessarily interact with all the people that exist out there, but being able to run easy to programs is, I think, the most decentralized, reasonable solution for determining who you interact with. So I think that there are technological tools. There's still underlying similarities around freedom of information and transparency and being able to I guess elicit all of the concerns that people should be sharing.
Yeah, I'm going to concur with that. I definitely think we're on a road to figure out what that looks like. I think people self-selecting their identity on how they want to be presented is what's first and most important, whether you're a researcher or a peer reviewer or whatever, whether that be a pseudonym, whether that be DeSci page, whatever that might be. My experience with peer review is I actually like it to be open and transparent, so I can have you can have honest conversations. I think where the peer review system falls down without being anonymous is where people don't have that. There is a peer review can be an incredibly brutal experience if the person giving you a review has had training, which most haven't, in how to have constructive feedback and so forth. You also sometimes have individuals, researchers who will try and sabotage another research because they're working on something, or they might pick up and take copy some of the work that they're reviewing and create their own work. So I think we have a very great discussion that we had about this integrity in research and peer review in particular. I actually moved from, so a lot of my research, I'm interdisciplinary, so depending on what comes out of the ethnography, I publish in education journals, tech journals, psychology journals, which is another reason I left academia because it doesn't bode well to be interdisciplinary. But what's interesting about that is each discipline has its own way of approach to giving feedback. And in the humanities, in creative writing, it's really interesting to see the processes and practices they have. It's open, you know who's giving feedback, and it's a very different, and I think, wonderful way to do it. So I think we can learn from each other. But I'm all for it, so that we can bring some integrity back into the system.
I want to say one could imagine, and I don't want to get too much on this, but one could imagine this also pseudonymously, because reputation works, positive reputation works pseudonymously too, right? And I think this came up with a word, at least that's where I looked at it
because you could have something like a positive reputation still be attached to pseudonym. So, if someone was, not cordial in the way that they do their review, or just a dick, and that could still show, on the pseudonym, right? And so, then you have like many of the, let's say, biases flowing into the pseudonym that we may not want to have attached to someone's personality, but you can still have a reputation being attached to that. And that could, without putting together too meta, if you have something like a recognition market, you could do that also pseudonymously, right? And that's metaculars. We used to use metaculars for our annual member gatherings, for our speakers to make predictions of where, after the talk, where a specific thing would be a year from then. And then we had people that did metaculars for during that year, so that we actually could trace back on whether this is something or what it is that they actually said. And then the winner and we could do like one be prize, one says, oh, I want to play pseudonym, I'm doing really well, but and so I think that is the work that you could imagine that the recognition market, well, I know that they do really well, they just assume a reputation that's the system. So you can have really starting, but then reputation really.
Yeah, in some ways, this is much around sort of trade-offs between privacy and transparency, right? And it's something that we keep kind of dancing around. Sometimes the goals are more privacy aligned in terms of trying to elicit open, honest, real-time feedback. Sometimes there's certain places where transparency is needed. So actually, that's sort of a gated version of transparency based on sort of the social graph of who's reading these reviews or providing these reviews. As a way of sort of really granularly titrating the degree of transparency that one would want.
Yeah. So I think, the whole ethos around Web3 about choice, right? Self-selection on how, and so I really love Allison's points. And I think that one thing around research in general as a practice, as things that we do, there is so much invisible data that could go into that reputation system that is not just about the doing of research or the reviewing of research. There are so many other things that we do so that research can happen, so that research can help the community, the ecosystem that feeds into a reputation model. I think that really would be beneficial no matter how you choose to be or how you want to portray in the world. I think it comes back down to the work that we do, and let's make it the work visible, and then choice around our identity and realize that we get paid.
And I want to extend something Allison was saying. I love the specificity around positive reputation working really well, because I think you can have one thing that existing publication infrastructure actually provides very well is very easy, convenient signaling. It's not a signaling. It doesn't do it well in that it works as you hope. It does it well in that it gives you the kinds of signals that are convenient for you. And there are some fields, I think that I'm going to get the number wrong, but I thought that it was something on the order of thousands of papers uploaded to the archive within machine learning alone. And if you only have papers, then it can become easily attractive to figure out what you should be paying attention to. And when you have that coupled with anonymous or pseudonymous reviews and an unlimited number of no good civil resistance mechanisms, then it starts being very difficult to understand. But also, you want researchers to be able to make a name for themselves practice. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah, and I do think it also depends on the databases and the public publishing systems where we're getting those things from, because they're highly biased themselves, right? We have 5 major media publishers in traditional academic research, that's an $18 million industry. And so there is a real bias in the governance and centralization of the research that we are doing. So where and how we get those indicators. I would love us to really be rebuilding the entire publishing system and really looking at what does it mean to have a journal? What does it mean? Is it truly open access? Who's funding it, and how is it actually benefiting the researchers? Which is another reason I like it at DeSci, because it's by researchers for researchers, without these large media companies who are, literally, taking advantage of researchers and universities, institutions across the world. So I think we could do a lot more. Where are we getting those indicators?
Yeah, so they're maybe not digitally, like like in an organized way, manipulating the scientific conversation. Like absolutely how that affects. And I really love that way to touch on sort of the culture of review and rudeness or preparation of individuals to be ready to get review and not conflating openness with anonymity or fully disclosing that and figuring out some interesting things there. So the last question I want to ask before we get up to the audience and ask some questions is coming back to the element of experimentation around your review and where do we actually go from here and how important is it to structure the perfect experiments, quote unquote, versus to just start having coordinated experiments and as many as possible. And how much, I guess the specific question I want to ask you was, how important is the question of focused meta-level research across all of these experiments? Right, because just in the DeSci list that I manage, which hopefully makes the repo guide be a much more convenient tool to use, but there's at least a dozen, if not 2 dozen projects playing in and around this exact question. And so how important is it for us to actually find meta-level researchers to coordinate with all of us to track our progress over the next 6 to 12 months? Otherwise, we're just going to be literally meeting a year from now and be like, wait, how did we go? And so, yeah. I love the same 10 hours at the web bench and just like 1 hour of the review. And I think that there's definitely a bit of that. With like a bit of the startup ethos and not those here where we tend to assume that all of our ideas are novel and many of them aren't. And so I think it's very valuable to build a bit of a sense of what people have been doing. I love meta science and meta science one as conferences of like people at like for example the National Bureau of Economic Research are very interested in questions about what makes science work better and faster, and cheap faster. And so like there is a lot of work on this, but I also think that we bring also a unique perspective and you can forward an experiment. And I'd love to see like quick and dirty minimum viable product 80-20 law type experiments with a clear goal of trying to find out what we should be optimizing for what and figure out whether or not we can do research on that.
I have a bias towards like practitioner, right? Because I come from much closer to industry, much closer to actually doing things, I suppose. And one thing I noticed as I was looking through all these situations is really hard to connect to like just people are doing to actual practical results. Like I want to make the next call better. I want to make these other things better, and it's not really how to make use of this. And I think if we start doing it, we should do a lot. We start doing it. The goal is what we're trying to get to is driving impact, and if we can optimize for that, then whatever systems we do, I think that's what we should be looking for.
Yeah, do you want to? Yeah, so I think meta-analyses I am all for. I think it's a really important practice, not just for development of a researcher and their research skills, and to understand what are the ideas that came before them. But I think it's also, if we're doing this, really helpful we're doing things like ideation and innovation. To me, most of the academic world is ideation, with people generating ideas, publishing them in papers, etc., and so forth. Whereas to have true impact with it, and that's where practitioner research. As an ethnographer, I'm in organizations I go in, so I'm a cross between ethnographer and action researcher. So I do the research and then I hang around on impact change, right? So it's super interesting for us to look at meta-analyses in any kind of work, what did come before us. Otherwise, we're destined for a repeal. And that is something in itself. Yet in traditional academic and scientific research, we have devalued any kind of meta-analyses or replications. They don't get published well. But yeah, I think this is very important. And it's also great training to do these kind of experiments.
Yeah, I guess in some ways there's quite a bit of academic literature around peer review, whether it's studies around Europe's use of open review and how consistent reviewers are, studies of double-blind versus single-blind review. And so I think one of the things that's exciting about Web3 is actually trying to see where it's real-time collaboration mechanisms. I think part of the challenge would be to figure out what is, as I kind of talked about Monday, the objective function of a lot of these experiments. What are we actually optimize for? Is it to drive distribution of more like the stuff that Jack did, but helping find applications and reviewers where that's working on. And so I think there's still a question there ultimately, so how do we know that these experiments are actually working out?
I do want to say, we talked about objective function of science and I think there we talked also a bit about competition. Today we mentioned Goodhart's law, was like, objective function of science that is probably also looking potentially amenable to Goodhart's law, like potentially could be better. But I do think I have a bit of very similar to your advice in the sense that what I try to do is I try to pull this out of academia into real world mostly, like most of them are in academia and they could already be in startup world. And honestly, if you're in academia, sometimes you don't know how close you are to starting a startup because you think that like you actually have to have a finalized product and it has to actually just already have customers. And then I'm like, no, you're pretty close. You see the product over here, like, and so actually pulling more people into the lab that can actually impact changes. I think usually what we try to do, trying to do as many experiments not only in first, but also actually trying to move it into startup world and actually whether it works or not only startup world, but actually just trying to drive change as quickly as possible. I think it's something that's a really useful idea. I think what you said yesterday there's a difference between science and actually innovation in the sense that there's the stuff that really matters is the stuff that changes the world. But if we want to get there, ultimately, I think the science is a nice intellectual pursuit, but I think ultimately affecting change in the world is what we aiming for.
And I think that I want to extend something there and say new mechanisms. I wanted to plug generally one of the outcomes of the project and the idea that you could use prior scores to make people better at things and to predict the accuracy, to estimate the accuracy of people's predictive capacity. And I think that the book Super Forecasting goes into some of how you would go about doing this and why, where it works well or it doesn't. But I think that there are specific aspects of what expertise in a topic or problem-solving area looks like. And I think that if we spend more focus on the meta level trying to improve people's capacity to be good at running science as a process, we might end up with better scientific outcomes, which might be the closest we can come to identifying what real impact is, or what doing things in the real world is, because it's very easy to say and try to convey meaning through brief descriptions about what science is for, what the objective function is. But in practice, if you try to clarify that, it's usually very easy to identify some scientific development that has been revolutionary that doesn't fit in that framework, or something that was completely useless that does. And so having an at least nuanced subjective understanding of what we want to optimize, trying to build some intersubjective agreement on what that should be and how to understand if you are working towards it or not, and using doing everything that everyone said so far, but also realizing that this goal is a little more intangible than we often treat it.
Yeah, it's very intangible, especially human research, because human beings, we are highly subjective. To me, there is no objective research, right? Because everything is subjective. Even when you apply metrics and numbers to it, it's a subjective application there. And so I think it's really interesting to sort of look at when we mean optimization. What do we mean by that? And be very, very careful if we're trying to put round, messy, colorful things into square black holes. And I think research, it's contextual as well. It depends on the application of your research, the context of your research, the methodology, the philosophical approach that you take for your research. And so when it comes to optimization, to me that's a scary word, because I know, having been in academia where they're trying to optimize, if anyone has ever heard of the research evaluation framework in the UK, the REF, and it's how the UK government funds all its institutions. And what they're trying to do is evaluate research based on impact and reach, or based on citation scores and so forth. Yeah, and it's optimizing based on a governance structure that is not effective. So I think as a community, we really need to go down that rabbit hole to understand at a human level, what does impact mean, what does optimization mean, and effectiveness or efficiency. Yeah.
Totally agree with everything you said. Including the stuff about subjectivity. Yeah, even as like an applied physicist, I will agree with you that like if you look at it closely enough, even physics experiments require some like acknowledgement of subjectivity. I also think that it's interesting that you can probably define narrow enough scopes. Some of the grant programs that Protocol Labs has are around improving the fundamental infrastructure of the internet, and we can make a grant that says like you get this much to start and this much if it ends up in a startup, like we'll match this kind of round in a startup, or like if it ends up being in like discussed in the IETF or like the IEEE standards meetings, then you get an additional set of funding because we want things that are worth that. And obviously then like you do that too much and you start creating spam for these groups, but you have to rely at some point on there being review as a useful, like you have to rely on existing systems to provide review if you can't do that review scale yourself. So fun experiments that can be done. You can often just narrow your scope and make progress that way.
Yeah, thank you. So I actually, as an ethnographer, we use multiple different methods, right? We have to, insight can come from anywhere. My PhD was actually looking at the skills and learning of devs during Web 1. Yes, I'm from Web 1. But what's quite interesting about that is in the academic sciences, the cognitive sciences, it was all about measuring skills, measuring knowledge, measuring learning. And even the research on expertise is not about more or less of something, it's about difference, that you can apply different skills to a scenario and therefore have impact. But that research really taught me the difference between trying to measure something on a scale numerically versus actually hanging out with the devs for 2.5 years. And the group that I worked with was DoubleClick, if anyone has ever heard of them. So they were the founders of the anonymous profiling systems that eventually became Google AdWords. And so as an organization, they were very much focused on behavioral profiling during Web 1. And so it was interesting just to hang out with them for a couple of years to learn how they learn, how they code, and so forth. But then you have this cognitive science literature that's like, you have to test them on their knowledge, right? Versus actually listening, and language is so fluid, so culturally embedded. So that's where, for me, you should have both words, numbers, pictures, images. It should create a cultural context of your research. So that's why, for me, it's really hard to optimize because everything is actually so colorful. Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed to say this, I'm embarrassed to say we absolutely should. Sorry, everyone. I only recently, I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm admitting it for the good of the event. I only recently became aware of what ethnography was and like all the things it entailed. I imagine there might be other people here, and I would love to, quick in like further reading, something like that, because I think it's something that we definitely need more of in like meta science generally.
Yeah, I can definitely give you a couple of things if you want to read or watch anything about ethnography. So ethnography is a multi-method approach. It's actually studying culture. And ethnography is really, it's actually writing culture by studying it and documenting it. So you could see us as documentarians. Every insight comes from everywhere. You have to be in the context, you have to be in the organization with people to really learn what is their culture, whatever it is. And ethnographers study all sorts of it, and it's of the living culture, right? It's as opposed to the dead, if you think of archaeology and so forth. It comes from the anthropological sciences, and we use multiple methods because insight into a people's world depends on whatever tools or technologies they use, what language they use. So when I was hanging out with devs, and it was the early days of HTML, DHTML, Java, I literally was having to quickly learn everything they were learning so that I could fit in the culture. But while we were hanging out, we were documenting everything. I actually say now it's a superpower professionally, but personally it's not a good thing because you don't turn it off. So whether it be taking photographs, video work, any assets that people create from Google Docs to spreadsheets. So if I'm in your DAO, chances are you'll see me hanging out and collecting. We're collectors. And from that we create, we look for trends and patterns in the data to really show what are the certain things that are meaningful to those people or whatever we're studying. So that's a way I can share articles. It's a fascinating world of science because it's not about reductionism. It's not about just qualitative research. It's actually trying to get a contextual picture. And in digital culture, it's really, really difficult about digital identities. And Dana Boyd is a fantastic researcher you should follow online if you're not, and it's all lowercase Dana Boyd. She developed entire science around network identities and how we actually create our identities. And then as a researcher, how do you follow someone's network identity? It's super interesting.
So if you want to know how to make this movement succeed, you're the best person to ask when you get an offer.
I just want to make sure I appreciate that. And I think also the appreciation of smart contract research forum, but Sturdy actually had a post from 2021 who did an ethnography of the DAO from 2016, which is also very relevant. If you go around the comments and don't know the DAO, one of the better little history lessons that encapsulate a lot of governance drama around this space. But anyway, so that's been enough of me asking questions. I'd love to turn it over to the audience to have a chance for you all to ask any questions. And feel free to come up and speak. Feel free to come up.
You guys talked about the media companies that influence what publish or where it comes from. And then you created your own institutions to maybe centralize or optimize or gain some efficiencies. How do you feel about the long-term impact of your own organization growing up in institutions and keeping them corruption-free?
Yeah, so the question was for anyone interested in here, pretty much how we're thinking about sort of the evolution of the different projects that we're representing and how, as they get bigger, potential institutional challenges and misalignment factors that can come up with that. I'm happy to answer that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because, when you look at the history of a journal like Nature, that got started in the 1800s, they had the best of intentions, right? They were competing in this competitive market where most researchers are publishing books or monthly periodicals, and they had delivered actually a useful product at the time, which is this weekly journal that combined lots of small papers, that researchers could distribute not just locally in England, but globally. And so they actually had sort of quote unquote a value proposition there that over time has kind of corroded, and now centuries later, they have kind of monopolized this prestige and used it in very rent-seeking ways. And so it's a really good question about, if we really want to think about how incentives and prestige compounds over, decades, centuries. We as a community may have the best sort of values right now, but it's difficult. And that's something that I do think is interesting also about sort of the ethos and opportunity in Web3 is this notion of being able to fork data. And I'm curious whether it would be possible to sort of fork reputation and prestige in that same way. But I think it's an important question to consider.
Yeah. So on that, a couple of things. How do we evolve ourselves as researchers, especially depending on where and how we've been trained, to step out of monetization and productization of research? So the relationship between the media companies and our universities, our institutions of higher and learning is a very important one. I think most of our universities are actually stuck in a label that we created a more open publishing system, and we saw research as a good, not a product. That is something I think would be great to take in terms of the culture and the governance around what we're doing in research, and it comes back to the funding. So just last year, I met a wonderful, amazing researcher from Egypt, Dr. Adele, through a group, and he and I started talking about this, creating a global research DAO. What does that look like? Truly run by researchers. The research is a public good. By then, I didn't know what you guys were up to. I hadn't heard about you. And as I started to dig in, we wrote a white paper. And it was really about how we sort of decentralize the practice of research, the funding of research, the peer review of research. And then I met Eugene. I said to Dr. Dell, okay, we need not to stop, but let's coordinate, let's work together. So if we don't also see our institutions or organizations as competing and don't adopt that commercial model that most media companies in research and universities have, where they're competing, but we're actually collaborating and coordinating together for the greater good of the ecosystem, which is what I love about Web3. So I think there's a lot we can do, but it comes down to culture, it comes down to money, and it comes down to governance. And then us as researchers not getting protective and precious. So ego and personal development is so important. It's like, you disagree with me, I love it because it's going to extend me as a researcher. But we take it so personally because so much we're so trained to be a sage on the stage as a researcher. And I believe in research teams, not individuals. So I think there's a lot we've got to do in the culture of governance power, and then it does come back to money, because if it's funded by one source or we have to sell our papers to be able to pay for our way, then we're just going to follow the existing system.
Well, I want to say, I love what you said on the ego bit, just as a very quick bit, but that actually it is shown that if you're a member of many different communities, then like if one of them, puts it out one specific context, and you don't take it all that much to heart. And so I think actually of different types of social settings by which you can, actually have your prestige as built up over different ways, and especially if you have pseudonym systems that maybe you will lose face in front of your actual community because that is your kind of like alias that produce the research. So maybe it would be easier to do that too. But to get back to your question, so I inherited like Foresight, which the organization that I run, that it has for 35 years. And so since 35, we have members that have literally been around with Foresight for 35 years. They care a lot about the technologies that we support. Many of them are like, really, really, really up for space exploration, like, really, really, really just want molecular nanotechnology and want it yesterday. And so I've been kind of coming as like very late in the world, except like I'm now with the 7 years. And so it was definitely a lot to be like culturally onboarded and also very vocal. And so I feel like somehow we've managed to, over these 35 years, to carry this organization forward in a pretty aligned way. And now, like now that I think recently we really picked up steam, like I see it was my kind of like my a little bit of a task to onboard the new generation and have a little bit more of a value flow created between organizations, because many of the things that we discuss now, prediction markets, right, but then even smart contracts, big contracts, all of these things, they have been discussed already, and like, even a few of our member gatherings 20 years ago. And so I think that having new folks, have the experiment in the space to do something new, while not being only tainted by what didn't work before, but on the other hand, also being able to learn from previous mistakes where applicable. I think this kind of like long-term continuity is something that is super valuable. And it's a very rich impact. But yeah, I think doing something that takes a long time is great. Also, I am a little worried about our space blowing up too much, because then we will get cancelled. and I think that for that, I mean, like, look, it's something that I worry about. And in some regard, because I'm female, I don't worry about it as much as male folks do, and like I'm really sad about it that they have to worry about that. But there's a lot of my male friends who are like deeply worried that if they say one wrong thing outside, then they get cancelled. So I think the more independent we can make ourselves of this, I think really the better, like especially we're all putting really like out there knots and pieces, and some of the technology, as you said, are sometimes like they're not entirely socially acceptable to fund until they then work, and then everyone suddenly like has false my preferences the other way around and want to do this entire thing the whole time actually. But anyway, I'm rambling now. But I think it's something that I think we have to think about as we get bigger. Like we also have more eyeballs on it. We will get more corporatized, so we will have more more threat of cancelling. And I do worry about that.
Over to window engineering. Dangerous and all, set of area of knowledge. And I mean, from our perspective, I really love what's come up on the ego side as well, because I think, what does it mean to design a system where you inherently try to minimize the ability of ego drilling to create for any individual player? And what does that actually mean, right? So like now we have this DeSci community that's forming up, it's about 15 to 30 different players globally, instead of just thinking of like, oh, what's the role that I can play? And shove it under kind of our umbrella. How do you actually really think of, well, no, what's the function that I can put in place to keep all that in check with all of us?
And right, like it's really exciting to be side that we're in really enough days that we can have an honest communal discussion of what that means and looks like. And if this is like 6 to 12 months from now, especially once more VC money starts showing up and different people start getting really different incentives, I think this landscape is going to change. So I don't have a clear, like, here's the A to Z of how to do it, but I think at least having these honest discussions and just being candid about here's the fears, here's what I emotionally want to respond to, and here's maybe how we should keep it in check, right? And that's not just specific to DeSci. I feel like we would all be better off in whatever systems we're trying to design on the internet we're building if we can really be that vulnerable and be that honest with the kind of conversations that we're having.
I really want to add to that. And so I'm a fellow in Kampala, in the Kampala community. And when I was, researching and looking at different DAOs and what I want to join and become and so forth, one of the reasons I really listening and talking to Naran, who's one of the founders of Kampala, is this whole notion around inclusion versus enclosure. And there's this philosophical as well as action-oriented practice that human beings have been socialized into for millennia, which is when we create something, we then want to enclose on it and protect it, and it's mine. Whereas inclusion is how do you open up to share something with the world and not be as attached to it. And so it's interesting, and Naran's got a great video on YouTube specifically about this, which is really good to look at. But in this, and I'm going to do a hat tip to Aaron's thoughts. I don't know if many people know Aaron, founder of YouTube, and not YouTube, sorry, that was Steve Chen, Reddit, and involved with Wikipedia and a lot of his work. And what happened to him as a result of his real desire to have more open access. And that's something I'm scared about. It's like the more I go on this journey, and it's not so much a cancel culture, but really looking at the impact it can have on you as an individual and institutions that go after you, that are trying to impose on scientific research, like what a Savior, Science Direct, these major media companies. So ego is not just about the individual, it's also about the community becoming arrogant and egotistical in their role in the ecosystem, and how can we really do a lot of work, a lot of therapy as far as I'm concerned as human beings, to really look at what is our need to control, protect, own, sell, benefit from, scale. We are addicted to scale. I love intimacy. Photography is about really getting to know people. So I think that there's something that we can all work on to really think about that in our communities, so we can coordinate more than protect and brand. This is mine, not yours. Whereas ideas are fluid. We should share that.
Let's get at least another question. So,
I'm a current user. Frankly, I'm pretty disappointed in a lot of the responses that I heard from panels, because I feel like they're super fun. Like crazy. So I challenge panelists. I would like you guys to state a problem that currently exists in how we conduct research and how we are using Web3 or DAOs in that realm to fix that problem.
And I'm happy to start off. So first of all, I don't need solutions to the problems that we're dealing with. This is just an exciting community where at the very least we can look for funding from these communities and use different kinds of tools. To answer your question directly, for us, it's mainly initially and doing community design. Because for us to actually come up with reasonable solutions that we can run a bunch of different experiments and actually learn about how to do this right, we need to have a group of humans who are ready to do the hard work together and be willing to navigate some very complicated issues together. I realize that might not be building in vain, but like building the culture from a place of culture is also the benefit of returning. And as a researcher, I love to have anyone point me in the direction of a scientific research that tells you how to, here's a guaranteed way to fix culture or something like that. So, some of these problems are much more ephemeral in nature, and so it is very hard to think of an actual outcome-based plan and to start collecting humans together. I've been taking a lot of notes. That's very functional follow-ups. Like, what do we do about that? How do we do it here? We had another few hours that we had to keep asking them. But in the interest of
I will stop rambling, but I'm also very happy to talk about it afterwards and try to get a better sense of what I think is most fluffy and how to it is just a hard thing. Like these massive systems that run for years. It's not like anyone have the right idea of a network and it's all people who want to tomorrow. So yeah, I don't know how building that super concrete direction. Well, first of all, thanks for the question. I often talk abstractions and love the motivation reason to come down to something more concrete. My role is I'm at a startup, but I'm a science funder for the most part, and I feel like a lot of the biggest problems have come from the fact that science funding is currently very zero. And so I'm looking at mechanisms to make science funding less zero, or more non-zero, where like if you have a call for grants and you say like, okay, if we get one grant, if we end up giving one grant, and like this is the amount, like this is the max amount we're giving. If we get good proposals that we fund, there's a 10% bonus. Every proposal gets additional money just because there are more. And like that would be a very simple one. There are more complex things you can do. I have an idea for a grant process where you create a forum, you tell researchers to show up in your field and going to allocate money, and you elect secret grant makers in the forum, and you tell them they can allocate capital and to whatever idea is proposed in the forum publicly that they think is valuable. You're delegating to them that completely there's no conflict of interest, and it forces everyone in the forum to treat collaborators as funders and collaborators, which I think is just a novel dynamic. I'm not convinced it work, but I'd like to try. And I think that I talk to funders who are like either private scientists who are interested, or foundations that are interested in funding experiments like this, and we have a big initiative around identifying, generating, fleshing out more mechanisms, creating our repository of them, so that we can bring in funders and do matchmaking between people who are experts, have knowledge, and could identify how that's probably funded, funders who have money and interest, and the teams that should get funding. And I think that there is a market failure going on here, and just creating these tools, I hope will be enough to those two that I mentioned will be enough to get people together and form this shelling point of novel funding experiments, so that we can take those national scale funding and say, hey, NSF, ARPA, try something weird like this. We found that it's worked. It might work for you too.
And I will say that the lack of mature institutions that don't really know what decentralized science looks like today. What makes me optimistic as a researcher on this approach is like these elements of the program that team or open source development that are being pulled into science. The process is not done yet. So for example, like all the data I use is public, all the code that I write is public. Everything all my thought process is also all public. And I think this is the right way to do science. It's the right way to move forward. And you don't necessarily need to go off of the old institutions before. So I hope that we create something greater and better. And these are the elements that I think there's promise, but I don't think it's quite there.
Yeah, so interesting question. I'm actually curious what your background is, what the type of research is you do, and why you ask such a question. Because this is about peer review, right? And how to be a human system on how we use Web3 tools, technologies, by which to decentralize peer review, which is then about decentralizing research in general. So to give you an example of a project, if I was going to be on the panel talking about my work, it is specifically looking at how we can decentralize data. So most institutions, most researchers as well, we collect data at an infinite pace. And a lot of that data is stored in centralized data as an asset that those organizations as an asset. So my research is actually looking at how to use emerging technologies to decentralize that data. So decentralize that data research. That data that I am you to have access to your data, and that's really interesting space to be in. But it requires change, governance change, funding change to make that happen. And that's very, very humanist system. So the time to research needed is a little bit different. So that's how I would respond to a concrete project that's going on in inventory. And it's looking at LERs, learning and employment records, that are being developed, that are being experiments that are happening across major institutions. But what does it actually mean to the individual, the learner? Because these assets, data is currency, is another problem that we have in our institutions. And also as debt, like what's the inclusivity principle that we're using on what we're designing. It's one thing that inclusivity is to the user base, to the community. Mine is, well, who's on your depth, and who you are is what you built and who you built for. So the work that we're doing at Digital Promise is actually a combination of looking at decentralizing learner data and how to actually design and develop more inclusivity principles to ensure that we're designing Web3 so it is open and it is inclusive. So that's two concrete projects that requires research.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. To be very concrete about the problem right now with peer review is that it's neither compensated, nor recognized, nor incentivized, right? And so I think this is an opportunity for Web3 to actually build tooling, and this is something that we've been working on, to actually make all three of those things possible, so that reviews are compensated, reviews are actually recognized, and then once you start putting some of these reviews on chain, you can imagine that long-term start going funds back to reviews that show particular pressures. There's sort of this, I think, emergent behavior that you can start experimenting around in terms of incentives and mechanisms. And so very tangibly, this is some tooling that we're actually some tooling that we are.
I don't talk about the review space, but just like what do I how did I get into this? How did I get into this? So I think I'm usually just matchmaking our fellows that are in various tech fields, including like biotech, nanotech, and so forth, and specific mentors that are also serving as funders. It's like a one-to-one process that is incredibly efficient. Like a DAO is so much better. They are already getting better. They are also researchers on the other side already want to like there is alignment. We just need like a better coordination. So that's why a DAO makes sense in this case. That's why we're exploring one. And the tech one that we talked about earlier is basically just looking in the general space of every single business with our biotech, decentralized computing, and space technology. Like for outside funders, I think like for the daily basis of just like, hey, do you have some new flow here? Or like, I'd like to do this and that. I'm like, well, I don't necessarily feel like the bandwidth to connect all this, but if there was a map, even if it was relatively for individuals when they enter the space, okay, this is roughly like a map of different technologies and different people working on this area. And I think they could just go in and be much more confident that they are funding a part of the stack over here, or someone else is doing part of the stack over there. So I think it's just trying to just basically take myself out of the loop. That's what I'm going to do. But also really like to create an ecosystem by which outside funding, which is now rapidly moving through crypto, but also to other areas, much more loose, honestly, if we were not making it significantly hard by hiding behind all of these very inaccessible institutions. I think there could just be much more money on the line, frankly, to support the work that you're all doing. So I'm trying to demotivate that.
Yeah, just one quick thing is that building on what Darren said with the incentive side, and actually thinking of how do we start compensating reviewers and line them up with independent researchers and let's start running those experiments. So like I'm concretely thinking of what are the little working groups we can create to map all the actual problem statements, understand what weaponry that actually is useful, and try to avoid the like 2016 era of like, we're building DAOs. Have you heard of it? Huh? Like to avoid that kind of environment so we actually know the concrete problems that need to be solved, and to not try to shove it everywhere it doesn't belong, right? So I think I can speak for everyone here that we're here to try to think about this and where they advance science and knowledge overall, and not any kind of smaller element along that way, like that way. Is that slightly less? Thank you for the question. Again, right, helping community, people feel comfortable asking hard questions. So
we need antagonists.
Intellectual story. Yeah, exactly. Intellectual story is great. Question, Patrick, I saw you had one as well, right?
You start to mix money into your like this
professional responsibility of what they're doing because we want to be as good as we can. And so there's sort of different motivations why someone might do peer review. It's like tokenized versus the help of the community. So curious, like what you all think about that dichotomy, and if tokens are better, how do you convince kind of more established kind of people that this is their paradigm?
I think it's a really good question. Jump in, but I think actually Ryan Nosek at I guess Open Science Framework has this really great presentation. He has this pyramid. I can't remember exactly how it goes. Maybe I'll tell you later. But there's always a question of whether things are driven by incentives, whether they're by norms, whether they're driven by infrastructure or culture, right? And I think these are not mutually exclusive things to some extent. And so there's a question, I think, really around whether introducing financial incentives starts changing reputational incentives, norms, perhaps in a negative way. I think it's one that's worth being very thoughtful about. I don't have a clear answer yet. These experiments are early on. I think it'll be an interesting thing to explore. I know there have been other fields that have played around with pain reviewers, and actually I'm not most updated on the literature of how effective that was, but something worth considering. I know at least one econ journal that has done an experiment of doing some sort of financial incentives for reviewers.
Yeah, I agree that there is. Having been in the system for a long time, I think it's also, you're very indoctrinated into being a prestige and esteem thing that's expected of you and part of the musical labor you do as an academic. For me, the one answer is starting to actually make that visible labor very visible. So if we can develop a model, organization system or what have you, so we can actually show that labor, show not just the hours that goes into it, but the value attached to those hours. I think to the academic community to have a big conversation about that, but I also think it depends where those incentives come from. A lot of the experiments with journals is around journals paying for that, which and that in itself becomes, was there a conflict of interest there? Whether it was community funded, I think could be a different model in terms of that incentive. And what is the incentive? Is it financial or is there something else? So I think let's make it visible first to really understand the labor model around peer review. Well, firstly around research in general, as well as including that part of peer review because it's an entire interesting kind of labor model. And then how we then look at that. So existing academics, you're indoctrinated, it's prestigious esteem. However, my experience, most academics hate it, they complain about it, they feel like that they're, investing in these large media companies and have no recourse because it's expected on their appraisal system. Academics are promoted on research, not teaching, or they're promoted on whatever journals they sit on and what papers they have in the world and the citation index, as well as the grant funding that comes in. So I think that Web3, the emergence of web, I actually just think that we have a possibility now to actually start to build a really powerful model, labor model, to really show what work is happening, what reputation looks like, what the incentive systems are that make it incredibly varied and make it visible. And then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, huge plus one, visibility part of it. There's a blog post I've mentioned a few times already, leverage points that goes through the ways you can change the system. And one of them that's very high impact is creating new visible flows of information. I also think that there are huge potential issues with incentivizing things, especially financializing things that were not previously financialized. There's a great study that showed that in one particular place, paying people, I think it was paying people for blood donations, reduced the amount of blood donations, or offering a stipend to let people, or let the government build a nuclear waste disposal facility in that province. Went down if they were offered money for it, because it went from being part of a civic duty to this is the price that people think that it's valued. And so I would generally recommend the book, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets, and it goes through a lot of these great examples, but also I think this is a valuable experiment to run, and I would definitely trust Darren to be thoughtful about it and generate something that at least we have a high confidence could work, even if we don't have a high confidence that it will.
Yeah, and I know on our side, we're really actively involved in this from academics, from various institutions, including some tenured faculty. And it really depends. You come in and ask, hey, I want to pay you, this is very high, $1 million, that sounds dirty, and I do this for the good of it.
And then you sit down for an hour-long conversation. It's like, tell me what your problem peer review are. And you start there, you start like letting them riff for a solid 20 minutes nonstop with like whole little thing that having like a peer review structure. Then all of a sudden you're like, all right, well, let's just pretend there was a fellowship model of this thing, right? And it's like following something that they the language they feel comfortable with, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, with that, I actually do more peer reviews. I don't mind carving time out of my schedule on a weekly basis to do peer review because now it's asking you to do peer review. I'm like, oh, I guess I gotta do it because they asked to it. They're not like jazzed to do it. So I think there's ways to think of the packaging of the incentive, which is almost as important as the incentive itself in this case, given the kind of culture and desire around people doing it. And yeah, again, this is still in the realm of anecdotal evidence, but I just noticed a hard correlation to in the short burst, like, hey, we took it out here, and they're like, no. They actually walk through it and find that it's probably how it might make sense. And it's like, oh, I'm more open to that.
It's also amazing for me to find people working in fields where some of the professors are just farming all of their reviews to grad students. That's awesome.
So first of all, I want to thank all of the panelists. I really enjoyed the discussion. I'm hoping all of you did as well. This panel went on for almost an hour, which is much longer than what we initially asked of all of you. So thank you all for being willing to stick around. So first of all, just a round of applause. Particularly, thank you to both Ellie and all of the other stewards this week. Not only are you a wonderful panelist, you're actually helping make all this happen. And none of this would have been possible without the stewards. I don't know how much trouble we've interacted with them, but it has been a wild month or three. I don't know what it's been, but yeah, I just want to give a big round of applause to all the stewards. So we were going to do it. Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you again. And so,
thanks, Eugene.
yeah, of course. So we were going to try to do a little bit of a workshop bit, even with folks who are just joining on the live stream. We set up a QR code so people can jump into the Discord. We have about 12 minutes, so I'm guessing that's a little too little for workshop time. So I think just to give you a sense of the kind of questions we wanted to let people discuss, we're actually digging into what are some of the voting models for funding research, what are best practices around this, should peer reviewers be paid, hear what people think. But I think at this point, we're just going to open it up for a little bit of networking for the last kind of 12 minutes, let folks connect. If anyone is interested, especially in being part of these kind of experiments, giving us, asking the hard questions, thinking what else we need to think through, please let us know. This QR code goes to scurf.io, which is the landing page on our side that'll take you to our bounties if you're interested in partaking in the open peer review bounty. Again, that's just white paper based, no actual coding necessary. You can check out our other 3 bounties we have available. All of them are purely text-based, nothing is actual coding. And yeah, please always feel free to find me. I have both my Twitter and my Telegram up there, and I'll keep this up for a couple minutes. And in case you came in late, we are probably going to try to go bouldering in about an hour or so at the Spot Gym, which is like a 4-block walk from here. So thank you all again for taking the time to be part of this discussion. And yeah, I hope we can all do fun DeSci stuff together.